Spencer's Christmas has come and gone, although I guess it technically hasn't gone because this is the draft recap episode of the Brewer Fanatic podcast. It's been a busy week. Not only did we have the MLB Draft, Spencer, you did a lot of great coverage for that. We had, before that, the Brewers finishing hot to close out the first half. We had some all-star drama involving Jacob Misiorowski, who then went to the mound in the all-star game and threw triple digits and threw a 98-mile-an-hour cutter that had the dugout laughing. A lot of stuff going on here. We're not going to be able to cover all of it. Like I said, we're going to focus mainly on the draft here because I would imagine that that's why most people are listening. And I think personally that we happen to have someone who's better equipped than just about anybody else on any other show to cover this stuff. This is going to be the episode where I lavish some praise on Spencer because this is his moment to shine. But we'll go through all that. Got a couple questions from the week as well. We'll talk about a couple things from that national series. But Spencer, before we dive into that, we do have our usual question from Jackson Churio's #1 fan to kick things off. How's your guys' week going? Do you have any plans for the weekend? Any ads this time? Hopefully Spencer can just sit back and relax because draft coverage is exhausting. Well, he can't relax yet, but I'll let you answer the rest of that question.
There will be no relaxing in general for me this weekend. It's been a busy week, even beyond the draft for me. And I was just telling Jack before we started, I played in a men's league basketball game today, and my legs feel like they're about to fall off from my body. Not in the best of shape at the moment. There was a time where I was like, now I'm not in college athlete shape. Now I'm just purely not in shape. So this was bad. This was a rough day for me. But generally, I also have, this weekend's going to be a big scouting event for me as a coach. So will be out there a decent amount Friday and Saturday. Sunday, I guess, isn't super busy, but I will be packing for a vacation that we'll be going out to Seattle for the Brewer series. So that will be fun. But that also means a lot of travel and a lot of stuff going on early next week. So not much of a break for me, but at the same time, it's basically all baseball related. And that means, I can deal with it. I can live with a busy baseball schedule. It's when I'm doing things I don't want to do and I'm busy. That's when I'm going to have a problem. So not a relaxing time coming up, but I think in a time I'm still going to enjoy. But Jack, how about you?
Well, I can echo a lot of that because we're going to be doing the same thing over the weekend and going into next week. I'll be scouting with you Friday and Saturday as well. I think I'm only doing half day on Saturday, but still, nonetheless. Sunday, then, I have a bachelor party I got to go to. One of my best friends is getting married in August, and I'm standing up in the wedding. So that should be some fun. And then I have to wake up at, 5 in the morning roughly the next day because we have to get to the airport so we can fly out to Seattle. You're going to be going as a fan. I'll be covering the game. So never a dull moment. A lot happening right now. It's that time of year, but mostly fun stuff going on. As far as how my week is going, it is with contained rage that I have to report yet another one of my softball games got rained out last night on Wednesday night, I should say. So I'm currently at war with Mother Nature once again. But outside of that, I guess I can't complain too much. Now that we have the updates for everybody out of the way, I suppose we can dive into some updates on the draft here. Like I said, this is basically Spencer's Christmas. So we're going to have the chance to kind of dig into some of this stuff a little bit. If you're watching on video, I'm going to pull the draft board up here. This is just MLB.com Brewers draft board, so you can kind of see the picks we're talking about. We're obviously going to go into the most detail on the first several here from the earlier rounds, but Spencer's got some information that he can weave in on just about anybody he sees fit. But since this is your area of expertise, I'm going to let you kind of take it away here, and we'll lead off with this segment. This is going to kind of comprise the majority of the show this week. So without further ado, let's get into what the Brewers did this year in the 2025 MLB Amateur Draft.
Yeah, they kick things off with their first pick at 20th overall, obviously. And they went with another corner infield type, which they have grown a little bit more accustomed to doing recently. It's not something they did for a long time, especially early in the draft. Obviously, as you progress, it gets a little more common, but they'd liked for a long time to kind of shoot up the middle, shortstop, catcher, outfield. That was basically what you were seeing. Otherwise, or center field, I should say. Otherwise, maybe a pitcher, but you didn't see many corner guys, whether it was left field, right field, first base, third base. In recent years, they've gone with Brock Wilken with their first pick, Blake Burke with their second pick, and they went with Blake Burke's replacement at Tennessee this year, and that was Andrew Fisher, who played first for Tennessee, kind of filling the gap that was left by Burke leaving to join the Brewers organization. The Brewers did announce Fisher as a third baseman. He played third base at Duke and then also at Ole Miss. And then when he made it to Tennessee, they were in need of a first baseman. They ended up putting him over there. Sounds like the Brewers are going to give him a shot at third base. And I've heard from some people that maybe there's a little bit more of a possibility of that happening than I maybe thought there was going into the draft and going into that pick. So we'll see. We'll see how he looks when he gets into pro ball at third base. But what they're really drafting here is the bat for sure. There are not many holes to poke in the bat. Like this is a very good offensive profile. I think there's potential for an average or better hit tool. I think there's above average power potential, maybe even getting into that if things click for him, that 25 to 30 home run range. He doesn't do it with the biggest raw power, the hugest exit velos, but they're good enough to get the job done. And he does it with more pulling the ball in the air at really ideal launch angles and doing it very consistently and doing it with about as much juice as he can muster from a swing that is not very, it looks somewhat aggressive, but it's pretty controlled, I would say. I don't think he's selling out for power by any means. I think it's pretty controlled. Now, the thing with the swing, it is a pretty steep bat path. The one thing I mentioned on the live stream during the draft that would concern me a little bit about a potential Fisher pick, because I was asked about it before he was picked, would be that he did have some struggles with velocity up in the zone. We've seen what can happen with a guy like Garrett Mitchell, Keston Hiura. That said, I don't think he has that type of hole in his swing. I think he had some struggles with it, but I also think that's one of those things where you can't find a hole in a guy's profile offensively, and you have to kind of create one, and there has to be something that's not perfect about a guy's offensive profile. And I don't think it's a huge concern, but it'll be interesting to see how he looks in pro ball with that, because pro pitchers will probably be able to expose it a little bit more often and hit that spot and go there more consistently, especially the further he climbs in the organizational ladder. So that's the one thing I'll be looking for. I think the other thing to mention here is I would assume this is going to be an underslot signing. It's about a $4.27 million slot. My guess is it's probably like a $750,000 savings would be my guess. Given he went to the combine and I would assume took a physical, that would mean he can only, he can't go any lower than 75% of slot. And that would be about $1 million short, a little over $1 million. My guess is he doesn't go all the way down to the minimum, but I'm thinking he takes a decent cut from where his slot value is, and they save like $750,000 there. So, Jack, I know this is one you obviously were able to sit in on the media availability with Todd Johnson, and also just kind of look into some of these earlier picks. What did you see with Fisher when you were looking into it?
Yeah, I think you touched on most of it, but the big thing that you didn't mention yet was the swing decisions. We know that's something that the Brewers really, really like. Andrew Fisher graded out well for his swing decisions in college. Todd Johnson said that was a reason why they were drawn to him. But he really said that it was just the combination of the good swing decisions, but also the fact that for a guy who hits for as much power and has as much power as he has, they think the contact rates really aren't that bad. Like, it's more contact than you would expect maybe from this kind of guy and this kind of profile. Now, we'll see if that holds true once he gets into pro ball and he's kind of climbing up the ladder. That's what I'm a little more cautious about, or I might need to see it to believe it, because obviously it's an entirely different beast once you get into pro ball and you're facing that kind of pitching and all of that stuff that can quickly trend the wrong way in a hurry. I mean, we Keston Hiura was praised as having a really good hit tool several years ago, and it turned out his hit tool ended up being absolutely miserable. Couldn't make a lot of contact at all at any level, really. But the overall thought on what they're thinking with the profile, I do agree with a lot of it. I think this is a guy who, for having as much power as he does, there's some other things that he really does well on that side of the ball. You mentioned like the bat pass stuff. I've written before about how like Pat Murphy has talked about how that's there, not that there's any perfect bat path, but sometimes having a little bit more of that steepness, even if it can mean sometimes some swing and miss up in the zone, sometimes that can be a little bit better than if you have that flatter bat path and you just end up kind of chopping that ball right into the ground and it's a ground out. So, or sometimes it gives you the ability to just kind of clip that high pitch and foul it back if you do make contact, things like that. I think the Brewers do need more guys who have a controlled version of a little bit of that uppercut. I mean, this isn't new stuff. Like Ted Williams was talking about this like 50 years ago about how having like the right kind of a little bit of a natural uppercut as you're going through and as you're meeting the ball. If you're meeting the ball at a little bit of an uppercut, that's going to produce better contact more often than not. You just need to be able to do things like adapt your swing to different areas of the strike zone, different pitches you're getting, all this stuff. I'm not going to dive into the whole 9 yards, but there's some stuff to work with here. I can understand why they like the profile. As far as the defensive home, like you alluded to, Johnson said that they're going to start him out at third base, but he did say something that I haven't really seen as much from other people. They think he's got the athleticism to handle a corner outfield spot if it doesn't pan out at third base. So curious to see how that would pan out if that's where he goes. The reports are that he's got a strong throwing arm. So I think from that standpoint, it would absolutely work out there. It's just, does he have the mobility to play out there? We'll find out in the coming years, but he's going to start at third base. We'll kind of see where this pick goes, but I do like that they're going for some power here and some power that seems to be wrapped in a package where maybe he actually has a better chance of getting to it consistently. Like I like this more than I like Brock Wilken in terms of kind of how that power profile looks.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I think with the swing decisions, that's something that Tennessee specifically is starting to get a lot of attention for being very good at helping players improve their swing decisions. Gavin Keelan, who's a Wisconsin native, was drafted 13th overall after really improving in that regard coming from Louisville. Blake Burke was said to have very good swing decisions. I think that is something that I could actually see this being a bit of a trend where the Brewers are interested in Tennessee players for that reason. I think there's maybe a fit there just organizationally and with Tennessee as a program. And obviously Tennessee is a fantastic baseball program in general, so they have a lot of talent. But yeah, I agree with everything you added there. I think this is, especially if he can play a position other than first and the bat comes around, then it's really exciting. And I think he has a good enough bat potentially to be a first baseman, which is a fine fallback if he can't handle anything else. So interesting pick for sure. I think again, I think it's a bit of a money saving one, which has been another common theme for them in the first round. We'll find out if that's the case, but my guess is it's going to save them some money to spend later in the draft. The second pick here was 32nd overall. This was the competitive balance round A pick that the Brewers are awarded every other year. They get the comp round B pick next year, and then it'll be A again. It just kind of goes back and forth. This one, they end up going with the high school. We'll say shortstop Brady Ebel from Corona High School. He was the third Corona High School pick in this draft to this point, only 32 picks in, which is absolutely absurd. Seth Hernandez and Billy Carlson both went in the, Carlson might have won 11th, but I think like top 10 or 11 picks. And then Ebel was the third one. Now Carlson's a shortstop, so Ebel was not going to play shortstop for that team. He ended up at third base. He's the son of the Dodgers third base coach, who you may recognize the name if you were watching the All-Star game, because his dad was the one throwing to the National League players during the home run derby swing off to win the All-Star game, and served up some good pitches to Kyle Schwarber. So clearly there's talent in the family. But Brady Ebel is, to me, he's just more of a, he's not like a freak athlete. He's more just like an advanced player for his age. And this is another guy who is currently 17. He'll be 18 in a week or so, I believe. But it's somebody who just has a lot of really solid skills across the board. I would say, first, I should say, I think there is a chance he can play shortstop. Billy Carlson was graded as one of the better defensive preps in a while at shortstop, and he was on the same side of the infield as him. So again, Ebel was not really going to get a chance, but he had played plenty of it in travel ball, and even prior to teaming up with Carlson in high school. I think he does probably end up at third base, where he has a very good arm, and he would move pretty well for a third baseman, I think. So if he ends up there, I would guess he's a pretty good third baseman defensively with a good arm. I think there's, to me, in terms of the hit tool, like I think there's a potential plus hit tool. I like the swing. I think there might be a little bit of like an arm bar in that front arm when he swings, but I don't think it's too much. And the rest of the operation just looks very smooth and very easy. And just, I like the operation quite a bit. He's 6'3". I think he's going to add a decent amount of weight in pro ball. And he can add some mass to the frame and still move well. And I think there's potential for like average power from a left-handed third baseman who could play pretty good defense, has a good arm. I saw somebody comp him to J.D. Dix, who is also from Wisconsin, actually, from Whitefish Bay. And he's had a great start to his pro career for the Diamondbacks this year. I like that comp. I think there's a lot there. I think Ebel's a little bit taller. And I saw some people say they could see him moving to second base if needed. And similar to Fisher, some people thought he'd be a good enough athlete for a corner spot in the outfield if it came down to it, but they think he's going to be able to stick on the infield. I would agree, just based on the video that I've seen and some of the reports from people that I trust, that I think he is an infielder. And it might not be short, but to me, it gives some Cooper Pratt vibes, who a lot of people thought wasn't going to stick at short either. I think maybe he moves smoothly, and people take that to mean that he's moving kind of slowly. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I mean, I'm going to be very interested to see him on video in pro ball playing shortstop, because I think he's going to get the opportunity to. But if not, third base is a good fallback. I think this is an interesting pick. And we got a question from Andrew asking, do we think Brady Ebel will be under slot, similar to Josh Noth going under in 2023? He mentions, I feel like that needs to happen if we sign some of the other players drafted in rounds 11 through 20. So I do think he's going to be under slot. I don't think it'll be as much as Noth was. Ebel had a little bit more attention around him at this point in the draft than Noth did. I think Ebel may have gone before the next Brewers pick at 59, but I do think they'll save a little money. My guess is just generally that Fisher and Ebel will save them around $1 million, maybe a little bit more. But if you combine what they go under slot for both of them, I think it'll be around $1 million saved on the first two picks. And Ebel's very interesting. Again, like I said, he went earlier than expected, but it wasn't crazy off the board. Noth was a pretty big surprise at the time. The next pick, they went with the pitching route. J.D. Thompson, left-handed pitcher out of Vanderbilt. He was ranked on Fangraphs as the 25th overall prospect in the draft. Keith Law from The Athletic had him at 33. So at that point, it seems like decent value, although he was around 60 for most other draft boards. So I think this is kind of where he fell in line. And interestingly, I would say Longenhagen and Law both kind of fall into more of the visual type of scouts rather than the data. And I think, not to say Baseball America and Pipeline and everyone else don't get eyes on these guys, but I think they do it a little bit more off of the data. And I think that's what I have to do most of the time. I think there's a lot to be gained from both ways. But I did find it interesting that I would say those are two of the guys that I would probably say are most based around visual scouting, have him highest on their board. So he sits 92 to 95 on the fastball. He's been up a little bit higher at times, but for the most part, the thing with the fastball is the shape of it. He throws it up in the zone quite a bit. There's good fastball shape here. It's around -4 vertical approach angle, which we've talked about before. That's a really, really good place to be for a fastball. He also gets like 18 inches of induced vertical break. and he is throwing it from a pretty low release height, about 5.5 feet. So all of those characteristics combined make it a very interesting fastball. I believe, Jack, you can confirm, because you talked to Todd Johnson. Did he not mention that they thought he had more velo? He had actually shown some more velo as the season was progressing. I thought I remembered seeing a quote on that.
Yeah, that was yeah, that's what surprised me. Johnson did say that they saw more velo from him like late in the spring. And it seems like they think that like that's something he can hold as he starts to develop a little more. So then you go from okay, it's more in that 91 to 93 range. Maybe they do think he can be more like a 94 kind of guy with that fastball shape. And if that's the case, then you're looking at a pretty good fastball there to lead off that whole arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the main pitch for him in pro ball, my guess would be, is going to end up being his changeup. It had a 51% whiff rate against it this year. Very, very good pitch at the college level, but also I think it's going to play very well in pro ball. He does a really good job of killing the spin on it. It's not like insane shape wise, but 6 inches of induced vertical break, and then negative 11 on the horizontal. So it gets good fade. It also just tunnels really well with the fastball. He played it off of each other very well. I think that was one of the things that the visual scouts really liked to see from him, was that he could take a fastball that he threw away from a righty and then just throw the changeup right off of that and make it really hard for the hitter to be able to tell what it was that he was throwing. I think the main question with Thompson, and my guess as to why most of the other draft rankings had him a little bit lower, is definitely with the breaking balls. He throws a slider and a curveball. Both of them very low spin rates for a curveball, in like the 2100 to 2200 range, which is very, very low. He spins his fastball just about the same as his breaking balls, which is pretty uncommon. He did have very good results with the curveball. I think it probably does play pretty well off of that fastball that he gets up in the zone. He can throw the curveball off of it. I think the question is whether pro hitters kind of pick up on that spin a little bit easier if it's not very high spin, because the shape of it's not terrible. I mean, it's a decent looking pitch on the whole, but one of the main reasons spin is so important for breaking balls is that it makes it harder for hitters to pick up that it's a breaking ball. It makes it harder to see the actual spin of the ball. And then it also causes later movement. Higher spin causes later movement. And he doesn't really have that with either the slider or the curve. Both of them, again, performed well. He could throw them in the zone pretty decently. He had good command of both of them. I think that'll be the question. So for me, I see like a lot of Ethan Small with this profile, but I know that probably doesn't sound appealing to a lot of Brewer fans because of how Small ended up working out. But I think Thompson has more velo in the tank than what Small was showing as a pro. I think the changeup can be similar, very solid pitch for him. And though I don't think the curveball and slider are great pitches right now, I think they are way further ahead than what Small had coming into pro ball, which was basically nothing. He couldn't spin it, and he also couldn't command it. He also didn't have very much shape to it at all. Like, while it's low spin, I think Thompson has other parts of the breaking balls that can play and at least be solid third and fourth offerings. Now, I wonder, my question is, he seems like a guy who they might try and add like a cutter to the profile to me. Just with the way he throws the slider, it's not a ton of movement. I think he could probably get it somewhat into that cutter range, and throw it a little harder at that point as well. So I wonder if they try and add that as something that could maybe, bridge some of the profile and make it a little bit more difficult, to even harder for them to pick up on these breaking balls that maybe aren't great on their own. But I'll be very interested to follow him. Jack, I know you also, talked to Todd Johnson about JD Thompson, and what were your thoughts on him?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing here, to kind of go back to your point about how the visual scouts had him rated higher than maybe some other outlets, I think that makes sense because Todd Johnson described him as a very big, like, pitchability guy, feel for pitching. And as someone who spends a large chunk of his time in the baseball world using numbers and metrics and all that kind of stuff to help break down pitchers, pitchability and just feel for yourself on the mound is absolutely a huge part of the whole equation for a pitcher. And it's something that you do need to be watching a guy to be able to see. Like, why do you think we've raved so much about Colin Ray on this show, even though, none of the stuff or any of the numbers are really going to come back and say he's anything special. But like you can just kind of get a sense if you watch a guy pitch for this is a guy who knows what he's doing. He's in control out there. He can feel his way through an outing if he needs to. He understands like, okay, what do I need to be doing with my arsenal? How can I maybe reshape some of my pitches? How can I change my plan of attack? How can I constantly evolve to make sure that I'm one step ahead of guys? And if Thompson does indeed have that kind of mentality, which Johnson indicated he did, that does make him a good fit for this Brewers pitching development staff. And you talked about like the breaking stuff. I asked Todd Johnson about that and basically asking like, what is your perception of where the breaking balls are at right now? I didn't really get a super specific answer. Basically, he just said, like, we know that we're very good at pitch design stuff, shaping arsenals. We've got guys throughout our system, Cam Castro, big part of that. Guys who know how to really help guys get the most out of their arsenal and kind of put their pitches together and put their pitch shapes together in the most cohesive way possible. So I would imagine that as Thompson is going through the system, like there's going to be some changes to the shapes of the breaking stuff a little bit. I think the question is what route do they go? I know you've talked about like maybe they swap out that slider for a cutter just to get a little more separation off of the curveball and then kind of try to go that way. I'm almost wondering a little bit because of the release height, if they actually do something about that curveball and decide that they want to try to turn that a little more into like a sweeper type pitch. Now it's tough to know really what direction they go here if he just has a hard time getting on the outside side of the ball and spinning it that way. Like it's just generally not super easy to throw any kind of breaking ball if that's not something that you're great at. But just kind of looking at that whole arsenal, sometimes when you have a guy who's fastball, curveball, sometimes that curveball can kind of pop out a little bit early.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering in his case too, I haven't looked at it super closely, but if you're a guy who doesn't really have like a super high slot, sometimes it's worse for the high slot guys because that's when it really pops out. But sometimes even if you're like a lower slot guy, is he trying to get on top of that pitch more? And is it going to pop out when he's facing big league hitters? Maybe college hitters couldn't pick that up. But if he's getting into pro ball, is that going to be something that guys see? And then do the Brewers decide, hey, we actually just need more of like a get on the side of it slider kind of pitch. And that's going to be your main breaking pitch. And then we kind of go from there. So does he go like cutter and sweeper or what do they do here? But you're right. I mean, the highlights of this arsenal are the fastball and then the changeup. I mean, 11 inches is not really, you're not really getting a lot of fade on it at that point. But I think the bigger thing to note there is just the fact that if you're killing 12 inches of vert off your fastball and you're killing like 10 miles an hour off your fastball and you're killing a lot of spin off your fastball, like all of those things are going to make that pitch very deceptive and make it play really well off your fastball. There's some very clear separation there. So it's going to be the bread and butter for him. But I am very curious to see kind of where they go with this breaking stuff because this is something that we know the Brewers are pretty good at. But at the same time, like we've seen it with Ethan Small, like and even Chad Patrick to some extent. If a guy just can't do it, there's nothing you can't change the way a guy moves. So if he gets in here and they find out and they do like the biomechanical analysis of him and all this stuff, if they find out, hey, you really just can't move well this way, like I would not be shocked if the breaking stuff just kind of stalls a little bit, but Todd Johnson did say that they feel confident that he's going to have the arsenal to be a guy who can start. And not only that, he did throw out that they think he's a guy who's already going to be a pretty advanced arm coming into pro ball. And that kind of goes back to the pitchability and the feel for pitching, all that kind of stuff. So I think for the most part, how quickly he ascends through the system is going to come down to what can they do with those secondary pitches, particularly the breaking stuff.
Yep, 100% agree. I do think of all of the pitchers in this draft for sure, he's the one who could be a pretty fast riser through the system if things are going correctly for him. But yeah, I think that's it makes plenty of sense what you're saying, and I think there are different ways they can go about it. And like you said, they're going to do some testing. They'll do, I mean, honestly, at this point in the way that everything operates, they probably already have done some testing of some extent to some extent on him, or they have data from somebody who has done it. A lot of these colleges now have actual borderline pitching labs, kind of similar to what the Brewers do. I believe Vanderbilt is one of them. I know Wake Forest has the most famous one, but a lot of these schools do have pretty high tech equipment, and I'm sure MLB teams are asking for that type of data as they try and go and draft their players. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with him. They stuck with the left-handed pitching group here with their next pick at 68. This was the compensation pick for not signing Chris Livonis last year with pick number 67. But they went right back to the same place that they took Livonis from, which is New Jersey, another New Jersey prep pitcher. He's committed to Coastal Carolina. He was a velo jump guy this spring, which the Brewers tend to like from high school arms. When they see a velo jump, especially cold weather velo jumps, they seem to have an affinity for those types of arms. It's got pretty good carry on the pitch. It sounds like as he gets a little deeper into games, it'll start to dissipate a little bit. The stuff will start to fall apart a little bit. But this is a 17-year-old pitcher in high school. That's not really a shock. That some of the shapes and some of the velo might start to get a little bit worse as the outing goes on. But the fastball itself gets really high marks from scouts, and also just in terms of the data, it's pretty good. I haven't seen a true extension number for him, but he is reported to have very, very big extension. Somebody who really gets down the mound, which for a guy who's not huge means he's probably throwing from a pretty low release height as well. It's a very, just the delivery itself looks pretty easy. It's loose. I think he's a guy who could be kind of sitting mid-90s at some point. He's kind of touching 95 right now. I think he's somebody who could, down the line, end up sitting in the mid-90s and maybe get up even a little bit higher. He spins the breaking balls very well, 3,000 RPMs. He also throws a cutter. He throws an upper 80s cutter that I think has kind of gotten mixed reviews, but I think just the fact that he has it in his repertoire as a 17-year-old coming out of high school, it's not something the Brewers would have to add. It's something they just get to tinker with and try and make a little bit better if it is inconsistent or maybe not exactly what you would want right now. I think that's a good starting point. And he actually throws a few more changeups than most high school arms do at this point from the left side, especially like it's a low 80s changeup. He takes 10 plus miles per hour off of it. I haven't been able to find any real data on it, but I know scouts like it. He takes a good amount of velo off of it. And it seemed to be a pretty decent pitch for him against good right-handed batters on some of the prep circuit stuff. So just really athletic. It's again a loose delivery arm action. I like it. He threw a ton of strikes this year. He's already got a pretty interesting 3-pitch mix and potentially 4. And again, 17 years old. The Brewers love model. Their models love younger pitchers. They seem to really like cold weather pitchers. And they like guys who have jumped in velo. So this is, I'm kind of upset with myself because I made like a long list of guys I wanted to predict to the Brewers last week. And then I was like, I got to cut this down. And otherwise it kind of cheapens the predictions. And he was on my list. I just barely cut him. So he fit for the Brewers big time. But a really interesting arm here. Jack, what did you see from Chiron?
Yeah, so I just, as you were talking, like tried to do a really quick Twitter search. It looks like in at least one bullpen session leading into the season, he was up to 7 feet of extension.
Okay. Yep.
7 feet of extension on the fastball. That's what this says. This is like a one-off bullpen from like a showcase account, so I don't know quite how literally or how exact to take all of this stuff, but
yeah,
high spin on everything, 3,000 RPM, like you said, on the breaking stuff. I like this pick a lot, actually. I think that the delivery looks really easy, like you said. It's definitely not like, it's not Brian Hudson, but like kind of what I thought of just from like an extension standpoint, how much movement he can get on the breaking ball, like how the fastball might play a little bit. It feels like Brian Hudson, where like the mechanics are a little bit different enough to the point where it doesn't look like every pitch is physically draining him to throw, which is always a nice thing. But no, this is a really interesting profile. And I think he's a guy who, like, just the amount of growth he showed within this season this really feels to me like like I know you talked about like JD Thompson being someone who could take off, and Todd Johnson talked about JD Thompson being someone who could potentially take off really quickly in the system. Frank Chiron kind of feels like that guy to me. Like all of a sudden he's going to be on a lot of people's radars, and he might turn some heads really, really quickly because, like I said, the amount of progress he made this year, what he has to work with already, if he goes into pro ball, like I think there's some very interesting traits here for a guy who, on top of that, already has a lot of room to keep getting bigger, keep getting stronger, keep getting even more polished. Like, I like this one quite a bit. This might actually be like out of all the pitchers the Brewers drafted in this year's class, I'm not going to say necessarily like the best one for sure, but I think this is the one that like gets me the most excited on kind of what could happen from here on out for him.
Yeah, I mean it's a ton of good traits. It's a bunch of, like you said, it's an easy delivery. There's a ton to like here, and it just feels like a very good fit for what the Brewers do well in terms of pitching development too. And it just seems like a really good match. As a Coastal Carolina commit, I can't imagine there's like a bunch of NIL being thrown at him. I don't think there's a bunch of concern whether he will sign or not. I think it's just a matter of what he signs for. My guess is that this is the first overslot we see, but I don't think it'll be by a ton because this was still a little bit earlier than I think most people expected him to go based on the boards. And that doesn't mean the public boards are completely correct. I mean, last year, Braylon Payne was way down most boards, but it turns out the Dodgers were going to take him like 3 picks after the Brewers did. So it doesn't mean that there's not something there in terms of, teams might have been higher on him, and for good reason, given the helium he had coming into the draft. But I still think it's probably not going to be too much over slot here, if at all. So again, still just kind of sitting at a pretty good point, I would say, at this point in the draft in terms of where they are at with their slot money. Their next pick, not a Coastal Carolina commit, but somebody who's been pitching for Coastal Carolina the last couple of years and made some really big starts on their stretch run to a national runner-up this year. Jacob Morrison, huge guy, 6'8", 245, just a mountain of a man there. It's the same height as, or pretty much the same height as Miz. And then like if Miz, cloned himself and then stuck them together, he looks like on the mound. It's a much different build in that way, but he was a second team All-American this year, had a very, very strong season. And it's a very interesting profile. I think this is a guy who, despite his size, actually throws a fastball that plays. A lot of guys his height are going to struggle to throw a fastball like up in the zone that actually has good vertical approach angle because he's so tall. And it's coming from a tall angle to get to the top of the zone. It's got to come down. So that's a tough thing for a lot of guys to do, but he was at negative 4.36 this year. So like there is an ability to throw that pitch up, and he seems to have a very good understanding of that. The fastball lived up in the zone for him. And it performed very well. Like it was an 18% whiff rate, which for a 4-seam is pretty reasonable. But the thing it does is help everything else play off of it. His curveball was his best pitch much of the year in college. It's the pitch he seems most comfortable with out of all of his secondaries. I should note, I didn't even touch on the velo. The fastball velo is kind of in that low 90s, and he's been up to 96, and during like the stretch run of the College World Series, it was up a little bit. He kind of sat in that 93, 94, touching 96 range. So my guess is, and based on just what I've seen and some of the mechanics, like I would bet the Brewers believe they can get more velocity out of him than he currently has. I think there's a little bit more he can do with his body, despite he moves pretty well for his size. I should know, like he's a big guy and he's pretty athletic looking on the move or on the mound. It's not like who's a good guy. I mean, like Lance Lynn doesn't look very athletic on the mound as a big guy, and he's not nearly as tall as Morrison. So he moves pretty well for his size, but it's an interesting curveball. It's not like crazy high spin, but it's got pretty good shape to it, and it performed pretty well for him. Some people call it a cutter. I think it's more of like a gyro slider type of shape here. We're talking about somebody who's more in that 0-0 in terms of horizontal and induced vertical break area. And he throws that in like the mid 80s. It was a very, very good pitch for him in college. It was something that he really commanded well. So I think he's coming into this with 3 pretty interesting pitches. And then he also has a changeup that he threw more this year. It played okay, but the shape of it, it's not very good. I mean, it's something that they'll probably it has a decent amount of fade, I should say, but like it doesn't have much depth to it. And he doesn't really kill the spin on it very well. Now, the Brewers have had success with high spin changeups, so I'm not saying they can't do something. Maybe they'll be able to tinker with it a little bit, get more depth, and all of a sudden it is a pretty good changeup with that type of movement to the arm side. But it's just a very interesting profile for a guy who's 6'8", 245, and also a performer against very good competition and performer in the College World Series. And I think this was one that a lot of people kind of pegged as one of the higher upside, like college swings you could take on a pitcher at this point in the draft, because they think there's more there with the stuff. And from that body, that type of mountain of a pitcher, like they think there's more there. And I would be inclined to agree. So that was a very interesting pick for me as well. But that was the end of day 1. So again, I think they'll probably save some money on Morrison again. So heading into day 2, which is where they have always liked to, they like to save some money for day 2 and what used to be day 3, but it's now all day 2. And they went and immediately went the high school route. And this was my guy. This was the guy I predicted the Brewers to take at this, well, not at this pick specifically, but Joshua Flores was somebody that just seemed like a very good fit. He's from the exact same high school as Josh Adamszewski and Griffin Tobias, who were picks in 2023 and 2024, respectively. So 3 straight years they go to Lake Central High School in Indiana for a pick. This is a guy who performed well at the combine. He was up to 97 with pretty good carry on the pitch and also some tail to it. We talked about how Woodruff's fastball kind of lost some of that tail in his return. I actually got some like Woodruff vibes, like the prime Woodruff vibes from the fastball shape when I was seeing some of the data on him. It's got some of that carry and it's got some of like a little bit of actual run on it as well. And again, up to 97, he just turned 18, but he pairs it with 2 very interesting breaking balls, the upper 80 slider, which he spins at like 2,900 RPMs. It's short. It's got really sharp tilt, kind of 2 plane tilt. It's got some depth. It's got some sweep to it, but it's thrown very hard in the upper 80s. And then he's got a curveball that a lot of evaluators actually think is going to be his best pitch, and they would put a potential 70 grade on. He throws it in the low 80s already. Very, very high spin, very sharp break. It's one that, in terms of command, he's still working on for sure. But the general shape of it and just everything that it's got going on for it, and thrown pretty hard for a high school curveball, it's very interesting. I'm very intrigued by the 3-pitch mix. It's why I thought he was a good fit for the Brewers. He does throw a changeup. It doesn't look bad, but it's not one that he threw much, hardly at all in high school. And when he did, it was definitely one that didn't have much command of. So that will be the question with Flores. Command is going to be what they're going to be looking to improve, I think, in pro ball more than anything else. But there was a report today that he's going to sign. I don't know what he will be signing for. That hasn't come out yet, but this is another one that I'm expecting, maybe 250,000, 300,000 over slot for the slot value at this point. But this is one of the higher upside high school arms. The delivery itself is pretty high effort. And like I said, the command hasn't been great. So this is going to be a project. This is not one that I think you'll see explode his first year in pro ball. But I do think there's potential for like 3+ pitches almost, and the curveball maybe even a little bit better if everything clicks right. So a very, very fun one for them to take a chance on. And we will have to see what he ends up doing in pro ball, but it sounds like he will be signing. And again, it's cool that they went to the well at the same high school 3 years in a row. I cannot imagine that has happened very often, where even the same high schools had 3 players picked in 3 drafts in a row, but especially by the same team. So a cool story to start out day 2. They went with another pitcher, this time from the college ranks, with the next pick in the 5th round, Sean Episcope. to me, the more I find out about this guy, like this gives me very big Drew Rasmussen vibes. A guy who had multiple elbow injuries, who was drafted later, but I think a lot of people early on this season were seeing Episcope as a guy who was a day one pick. He had a 9 strikeout game against Wake Forest in 5 innings and really, really looked the part against a very good lineup and with a much, much lesser talented team around him. He stood out big time in that game and was getting some pretty big hype after that. Then he ended up tearing his UCL for the second time. He got the internal brace surgery this time. So slightly different. He had Tommy John surgery coming out of high school. This time he gets a little bit different of a surgery. But when he was healthy, he was, I've seen different reports. I've seen some people say he was up to 99 this spring. Most are saying he was up to 97. But it's a pretty interesting shape on the fastball. Again, we talked about the vertical approach angle with other guys. Negative 3.92 for him with 17 inches of carry on it. So pretty good, pretty interesting. He's a short guy and he does not get much extension. And I actually saw some people say that it's one of the weirder release heights for hitters because he's actually got a very high release height for his height. So he's got a pretty high arm angle, like he goes pretty over the top. And part of that is that he gets this carry on the fastball, but it's just a weird, hitters just have a tough time picking the ball up is what I've been seeing and hearing on this. So that adds to some of the deception. He's got a gyro slider shape and he throws that in like that kind of 84, 85 range. And then he's got a curveball that has quite a bit of depth and quite a bit of sweep on it. Both the curve and sliders are spun pretty high on the RPMs. Curve is pretty close to 2,900 RPMs and the slider's more in that 2,600 range. It's a pretty interesting mix. Now he threw a few changeups, not many. And there was some fade to them, but not much depth. So I don't know that's going to be a pitch that he's using a ton in pro ball, but he at least has, the beginning framework to work with on that. But this one, to me, like I said, it gives me those Rasmussen vibes. And we saw Rasmussen pitch in the All-Star game the other day. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be that, but just the frame, the multiple elbow injuries, the guy who has the type of stuff that probably goes a lot earlier in the draft if he's healthy. It just all really reminds me of Rasmussen. But Jack, I know this is one you were interested in as well. What did you see with Episcope?
Yeah, I think anytime that you got someone who pretty much already has both breaking pitches figured out, like there's nothing you need to change with either one of these pitches. And I think that's a pretty big deal right off the bat. We just talked about like JD Thompson. What do you do there? This is basically the opposite of that, where this is like down pat. They don't need to touch these pitches. And I think in today's day and age, like a lot of people know that spin rate is something clubs are looking at when they're looking at potential guys they can draft, but I'm not sure everybody knows why. For as many things as you can teach in pitching nowadays with pitch development, you really can't teach spin. Like that's kind of one of those things where either a guy can do it or he can't. And really more so what's taught nowadays is like how do you use your spin?
Yeah.
Like you can't teach guys to spin the ball more, but you can try to like coax guys into like, okay, like what is our information on like the way your body moves and then what the pitch tracking information is telling us? Like, what does this tell us about like the direction you can spin the baseball? Like, can you get on the outside side of it? Can you pronate? Do you stay behind it? Well, like that's the kind of stuff that they kind of work with a little more. And then they kind of will try to build your arsenal around that kind of stuff. You can't really get a guy to spin the ball more. I mean, we had like the spider tack scandal and the sticky stuff scandal several years ago. We know that increases your spin, but other than that, like part of the reason guys were doing that is because there's like no other way to actually get there. Like it's kind of one of those things where either you've got the feel for doing it or you don't, and you don't really always know why you do it either. Like, sometimes it can be like a product of like, the size of your hands or how long of fingers you have or different things like that. But by and large, it's like, it's just kind of something either you're really good at, or if you're not great at it, you can't really learn how to do it. So that's the reason why it's something you see clubs emphasize. But again, it's not only can you spin the ball, it's can you spin the ball in the right direction where that spin is actually helping you. And the fact that Episcope has 2 high spin breaking balls and they're very distinct, he can use them in different ways. that's something that really gives him a leg up on other guys. And I think it's part of the reason why you can afford to try to take a gamble on a guy who's going to miss some time due to injury, because if he doesn't need like that piece of his development as a pitcher, you can hit the ground running with him a little bit more
Yep.
when he's healthy. So like he doesn't need necessarily the time that JD Thompson might need to work on some of these breaking pitches because he's got this stuff already. So he's a guy who, when he comes back, and this is me, I'm speculating on this. This wasn't something that Todd Johnson said per se, but like he feels like a guy who the Brewers, I would imagine, think that when he's healthy, like it can start happening really, really quick, and he's going to be able to make up for that lost time really quickly, or not even make up for it, because it's probably time that he doesn't even really need as much as other
Yeah.
guys would need.
Yeah, I think back to Rasmussen with that, and I think he, when he finally was healthy, went straight to high A. He made a few starts, he dominated, and they were like, all right, time for double A. Like, with an arm that talented, you can skip some of those levels because he doesn't need to make that trek through the minors and work on things along the way. You obviously get to a point where, okay, now he meets his talent level, and now we have to find how we're going to develop him from here. But I do think, like you said, he can kind of move quickly after the injury. And obviously they'd start him at the lowest levels, I think, for some of the rehab stuff and everything else. But like once he's fully healthy and ready to throw in games, I could see him being like a high A guy very quickly, and then even moving to double A quick as well. So definitely an interesting pick there. Kind of continues.
Just a note on that. You mentioned like Rasmussen. So Brewers drafted him in 2018, but he was out that year because of, the elbow injury. Debuted like in pro ball, came off the injury, through about 70 innings in 2019, started in A ball, got up to Biloxi, and then was in the big leagues in 2020. Like, granted, there's some COVID stuff that's going on there that makes it a little weird, but still, like, just how quickly he got up here as soon as he was healthy, hit the ground running. Don't waste any time at any levels, like you talked about. He made his season debut in A ball. Then he made 4 starts with Carolina in high A, then right up to double A, where he finished the season, and then on the big league roster in 2020, and is more or less stuck in the big leagues since then.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a path, if things go correctly for him, that he could potentially follow. So it kind of follows a trend like I talked about. I think Thompson maybe doesn't quite fit this, but I think they found some pretty interesting like upside in college arms, which isn't always the easiest thing to do, but the Brewers have had a lot of success with that. You think about Corbin Burns was a 4th round pick, and Brandon Woodruff was a 10th round pick, like or 11th even, I think. But either way, like they've been able to find this in college arms where they think there's untapped potential, and I think that might be something they are doing again in this draft. They went with a position player for the first time in a few rounds here in the 6th round, Daniel Dickinson out of LSU. So they drafted a Coastal Carolina commit and then a Coastal Carolina pitcher, and now they took an LSU player. So some for people who like the Bucks were accused for a long time of just drafting whoever won the national championship's best player available. So like maybe the Brewers were looking that way, but that's not really the case here. Dickinson, interestingly though, was quite a bit higher on a lot of boards. A lot of people had him in their top 100, and he ended up going at pick 185 here in the 6th round. Interesting player. Like, he really good bat to ball skills. He makes good swing decisions. He hits some line drives to all fields. Little more juice than you might guess. I think he had a 110 max exit velo this year. So there's some pop in the bat. He played in the Cape Cod League, and he also played for Team USA Collegiate, the Team USA Collegiate team. So some wood bat experience. The overall numbers in those leagues weren't great. Pretty small sample size. Scouts who saw him and some of the under the hood stuff sounds like it was pretty solid still. So I think that was something the Brewers were willing to look past some of the results and see some good process-based stuff with wood bats. He broke his hamate bone and played through it in the College World Series for like the last month of their run. And their coach did not want to take him out of the lineup, despite the fact that he wasn't contributing a lot. I think we have to make the joke that this sounds like someone Murph might just put in the big leagues the moment he signs, because this sounds like a big time Murph scrapper type of guy. But he's played shortstop. He transferred from Utah Valley, actually, a really big step up in competition for him to go to LSU, and he very much held his own. But either way, he's probably a second baseman, I would guess, and I think he'll be a solid second baseman. Could probably play a little third as well. I don't think he's as fast as like the big time stolen base numbers he had would suggest, but I think he's just a very, very good base runner, a smart base runner, and a very solid all around player who does a lot of good things well. And I think that's kind of what we've seen with this Brewers team this year, that there's a lot of use for those types of players, filling out a roster around some of the maybe higher ceiling guys as well. And he definitely has, like I said, some Murph type of vibes to him, a guy that Murph would like, but just does a lot of good things on a baseball field. And I think he's supposed to be able to be back playing baseball by the end of this season with the hamate surgery. My guess is they'll probably shut him down and let him heal, because hamate stuff does tend to take a while to actually get like comfortable playing baseball again. We've seen a lot of players come off of it and struggle for a while. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it. It'll also be very interesting to see the bonus on this one. This one, I have no idea. He is a junior, so he could go back if he wanted to. And like I said, he was ranked quite a bit higher than where they ended up taking him. So for a college pick, this could be one where I maybe see, I wouldn't be shocked to see slot or higher, despite it being a college guy at this point in the draft. The next pick, they stuck with a college bat, this time going to Boston College, playing the hits on left-handed outfielders from Boston College with their Sal Frelick connection. Josiah Ragsdale started at Iona. I think he's got a little more pop than maybe the overall numbers would suggest. His swing reminds me of a little bit, in the setup and everything, reminds me a little bit of like Curtis Granderson when I look at him and I watch some of the video. His chase rate got better every year of college. Bat to ball skills, I wouldn't say are great, but I don't think they're bad either. That, like, some people started copying him to Frelick right away. It's a different profile offensively. He does have a little bit of like the slap type of hitting to him at times, but he's not quite the bat to ballsman that Sal Frelick is. Very fast guy. I think the speed probably plays better on offense than it does on defense. I've seen some video of him in the outfield. I've seen some reports that people think he's probably going to have to move off of center field, but the Brewers do develop that very well, and we've seen them make some guys who had that question mark around them kind of fit wherever they need them to in the outfield. It's an interesting pick, especially for the offense. He performed very well on the Cape Cod circuit this summer. He slashed 373, 467, 451 for a 918 OPS. In 60 plate appearances, he only struck out 8 times to 8 walks, and he was 15 of 18 on steals in the Cape Cod League. So against good competition with wood bat, he performed really well this summer, and I think that probably helped the Brewers feel even more comfortable making this pick. Interesting guy for sure. I would imagine probably an underslot signing there, but maybe closer to slot. They went with a high school pitcher, back to the prep arm market for their 8th round selection. This one was a pretty far off the board name. Not really even like Baseball America. It took them a while to even be able to come up with a write-up for him. Hayden Vucinovich. He's from Minnesota. It's a pretty athletic delivery, I would say, but it's a kind of high effort. He's a Gopher commit. He's committed to the University of Minnesota. But after a big winter, he went from like an upper 80s guy to touching 95 this spring. So again, a cold weather velo jump guy, this time pretty far off of boards. This one, to me, I wonder if they can get him at like slot value, like they did with Griffin Tobias and Ethan Dortches last year in the 9th and 10th rounds. I don't know that he will cost a ton to sign as an 8th rounder, as a prep arm, but he's got a low 80s curveball, spin rate up to 2,900 RPMs on it. It's got quite a bit of depth. It's got some sweep to it. He throws an upper 80s slider in the 2,600 RPM range. And the changeup, he kills the spin on it well, and he gets around 15 to 17 inches of run on it. So there's an interesting profile here. And this is, again, somebody I think that kind of was flying under the radar. This is Ginger Polson's territory. She's the one who drafted Griffin Tobias and Ethan Dortches and Josh Adamszewski. And, well, going back to Joshua Flores, that was her territory as well, all the Lake Central guys. She has been very good at finding some of these very off-the-radar, under-recruited, undervalued high school players over the last few years. Luke Adams is another one. Just a lot of interesting guys that she's been able to kind of unearth and find for steals for the Brewers. And I have a feeling this is probably another one that she's pretty high on as somebody who, comes from her territory. And it's a rare high school pick out of Minnesota for the Brewers. They haven't had many, despite it being kind of in their backyard. So an interesting pick here, but somebody who had some helium late in the draft and probably a bit underrated. They went a different direction at the 9th round pick. This was a college junior from Duke, left-handed pitcher Andrew Healy. He's listed at 6'6", definitely looks the part. He was actually in the portal. He struggled this year after a very strong freshman year and then a solid sophomore year. I think there's some untapped potential here as well. So he kind of sat in the low 90s for the most part in college, but at times he would touch 97. So again, we talked about kind of with J.D. Thompson earlier, somebody who flashed velo that the Brewers, I'm guessing, think they can get out of him more consistently. The changeup flashes as a plus pitch. Like, there's actually quite a bit of Thompson similarities here, I would say. He's more over the top. Healy's got a higher arm slot than Thompson does, but I would say the fastball and the changeup are very similarly interesting to J.D. Thompson. Similarly, the curveball needs some work. I guess on the other side of things, though, Healy does spin the ball decently. He's just more in the matter of, like, can you command it and can you get a more consistent shape with the breaking ball? So I think of Tate Keener, who they drafted a couple drafts ago, and somebody I'm pretty high on right now who's in Double-A, pitching very well. He had a lot of these questions too. He had a good fastball that probably had more consistent velo that he could reach, and then he had a good changeup, and then he had interesting secondaries that he could spin, but he couldn't really command or throw consistently. And now he's in Double-A and he's doing those things pretty well. So I think this is kind of the case here. And similar to Healy, like Keener, they both kind of pitched in like a swingman role in college. Both were kind of relievers and starters. But the Brewers made Keener a starter, and my guess is they're going to do the same with Healy, or at least attempt to. So an interesting one. Again, some untapped potential for a college arm. Their 10th round pick, I think this is probably going to be the lowest bonus of the entire draft for the Brewers. This is their only true senior sign out of college. Braylon Owens out of UTSA. He was one of the key pitchers in their upset of Texas. He throws 90 to 93. He's touched 96. Some pretty decent arm side life on the two seam. He's had extension up to 7 feet on all of his pitches, or especially on the fastballs. He throws an upper 80s cutter that probably needs some more consistency to the shape, but shows flashes of being an interesting pitch. So he's got the 3 fastball mix that the Brewers like. He also throws a slider in like that 82 to 84 range, spins that at about 2,800 RPMs, a curveball in the upper 70s with a different shape than the slider, more depth to it, a little less sweep to it, also spins that well. And then he also has a changeup. So there's like a legitimate 6-pitch mix here. Like I said, he finished the upset against Texas. He struck out 7 in 4 innings to close out that game against them during their surprise College World Series run this year. I think this is probably going to be a very cheap bonus guy, but I think there's something here. Like, there's interesting stuff across the board. It's a 6-pitch mix, and he had some solid performances against good college programs. Overall, it was like a 4.17 ERA, I think. He also had a pretty high walk rate to go along with a decent strikeout rate. But if they can rein in some of the command and maybe get that velo into the 94 range a little more consistently with the 3-pitch or the 3 fastball mix and the 2 breakers and the changeup, all of them interesting, there might be something here. This is a big boy too. Like, Braylon Owens is 6 foot, about 230 pounds, and he definitely looks it. But he's a gamer. I was watching this game actually when he was pitching in the College World Series. It ended up being his final time, but this was a guy who took a 108 mile per hour comebacker off of his pitching elbow and tried to stay in the game. I mean, he was trying his hardest to stay in the game. He couldn't in the end. He just didn't have it. But like, he was throwing, he was basically begging to be kept on the mound, and ended up being, again, his last college appearance, but showed some of the ability and the toughness and the bulldog mentality he has. So for what I'm expecting to be like probably a $10,000 to $25,000 bonus guy, I think this could be a pretty interesting flyer to take on somebody like that. So an interesting one there. Moving to what would in the past have been day 3. The Brewers went very heavy on prep players in the 11 through 20 rounds. So CJ Hughes was their 11th round pick. This is one that I had actually kind of called out as a fit for the Brewers. He has a lot of Brewers kind of traits here. So he's a switch hitting shortstop. He's 17. So he fits the model for the age. They like their switch hitters recently. They like these shortstops who he grades out as a very, very good defender, and he's a really good athlete. He's very fast. The bat is the question here. Not because he doesn't have like good bat to ball skills or anything like that. He does, but he does not have much power at all at the moment. There might be a little bit more from the left side, not much from the right, but what you're buying here is the glove, a guy who doesn't turn 18 for 3 months still, and then some switch hit ability with pretty good bat to ball and some hit tool ability from both sides. Their 12th round pick ended up being a high school lefty pitcher, Cooper Underwood. This guy to me is very much a Brewers fit. I wonder about the signability here, but low 90s fastball. He kind of jumped up and was sitting more 91 to 93 this year. Very good traits on it. I think there's more velo in the tank for sure down the line, just with his build. I think he's going to add mass. I think he's going to get bigger and move faster and all of this, but it's a very, very nice and clean delivery. He spins a slider and a curveball, both in the 3,000 RPM range. Big time spin ability. The curveball grades out as, I think, one of the better curveballs in the class for high schoolers. Really, really big fan of that pitch. The changeup actually has a decent shape, but he doesn't really take much velo off of it. So I think they would want to separate maybe the fastball and changeup velo a little bit more down the line. But I just get some of like the Bishop Letson vibes from a couple years ago as somebody that this is one that I really, really want the Brewers to be able to sign. Of all of these 11 through 20 picks, I think they will sign Hughes just because he was the 11th rounder, but I really like Underwood in the 12th. So I'm hoping they can rein him in as well. Gavin Lordson, they stuck with the prep pitching with their next pick, this time a righty. Some people did view him as more of like a position player prospect at one point, but he was mostly a draft prospect as a pitcher at this point. He's committed to USC. I would guess a pretty tough sign, but he's already touching 96. Inconsistent shape. It gets some run on it, gets some cut on it at times. But at the draft combine, he was up to 19 inches of induced vertical break, so very good carry on it. And when he's got it consistently, it looks like a really good pitch. He also gets a lot of extension. He throws a low 80 slider with a lot of sweep. The changeup's definitely a work in progress, and it's kind of a two-pitch mix right now, but he's got a lot of the spin characteristics. He's got a very clean delivery, big extension, and an interesting fastball shape, especially when it's consistent. So this would definitely be an interesting signing. I'm guessing with the USC commitment, that's going to be a bit of a tough one. They have both the NIL money and a pretty good history for baseball and developing players. So definitely would not complain, but I'm not going to get my hopes up super high on that one. The next pick is one of the most interesting to me of this whole period of picks from 11 to 20. Brendan Brock is one of the most ridiculous athletes in the entire draft, probably. Drafted as a catcher, and he mostly caught at his JUCO. He could play center field without a doubt if needed. He was clocked at 23 miles per hour running. People are putting a 70 on his speed. Pretty strong arm behind the plate, and he had huge production for his junior college. He set their all-time home run record in only 2 seasons. The thing here, he is committed to Oklahoma, so a pretty good baseball program. But what I didn't notice at the time of the pick is that he does turn 21 very soon, and that means he'll basically be a 22-year-old next draft. And that does make me wonder how high of a ceiling he actually has in next year's draft, even if he did go to Oklahoma and perform really well. He'd be a 22-year-old true senior because he did have a full year of JUCO that he didn't play. So it makes me wonder if he's more signable than I originally thought. So that would be a really fun one. I think there's just a ton of tools to work with there. I don't know exactly what he is as a player, but like a lot of athleticism, a lot of speed, and it's just a weird catcher profile to have all of those things going for him. Dominic Cadiz was the 15th rounder out of Notre Dame High School in California, UCLA commit, probably a first baseman. He played some third base, but I think he's probably a first baseman long time. What you're buying is definitely the bat, and I think the bat's pretty legit. He's been playing in a wood bat collegiate league this summer, and he's hitting balls up to 112. He's striking out less than he's walking. He's got 7 homers facing college-level pitching. And he pulls the ball in the air a lot with a bunch of power. So, like, there's a ton to like with the bat. Again, it's probably a first base only profile, and a UCLA commitment makes me wonder if that's going to be an easy sign or a sign at all. But very fun bat that I definitely would like to bring into the fold. Parker Coyle was their only college pick, or 4-year college pick in 11 through 20 rounds. He had really, really good results at Arkansas out of the pen this year as a lefty. 1.27 ERA in 22 innings. He had a 24-2 strikeout to walk ratio. The fastball's normally in the upper 80s, but he's been up to 94. I saw a video of him throwing an immaculate inning. He throws a cutter that's got similar velo to the fastball, and then a big sweeper with a lot of spin, and a changeup that seems to play pretty well off of his fastball that he kind of runs at times and also gets carry on at times. Like, he seems to manipulate it, and I think it is on purpose. Small sample. My guess is they're going to try and make him a starter just with a lot of pitches in his arsenal. He didn't throw more than an inning at a time for Arkansas, but they've done this before. Tyson Harden was an example of that in last year's draft. He was only a 1-inning guy, maybe 2 at Mississippi State, and they made him a starter, and he's in Double-A shoving right now, only a year later. So I think they're going to try and make Coyle a starter. I think he'll probably sign for what won't even amount to any extra bonus. The $150,000 range is where it doesn't count towards your bonus pool. Anything up to or below that. I'll skip 19th and 20th rounders here because I don't think those are signable ones, but Chase Bentley and Mikhail Holden are committed to Texas A&M and Alabama. Bentley is a Clutch Sports guy, which is, for people who aren't aware, that is the agency that LeBron is signed with. So it's one that is known for chasing some money. My guess is he's going to A&M, getting some nice NIL, and then he'll be a pick later on. But the 2 I will talk about are the 17th and 18th rounders. Luke Roop, who is committed to South Carolina, but his head coach at South Carolina did say yesterday that he expects Roop is going to sign with the Brewers. We don't know the money yet, but he is going to sign with the Brewers. So he's got a fastball up to 93 with pretty good carry on it. Curveball in the low 80s that would look like it would play pretty well off of that fastball. And he throws a sweeper a little bit harder, kind of into those mid 80s at times. Changeup looks to be a distant 4th pitch right now, but he does have some feel for it. But yeah, like I said, he is expected to sign. Chris Clegg, who does a lot of really good prospect work, lives in that South Carolina area, or in the Carolina area in general, and saw him pitch a couple times. He said this spring, really big fan of him, and I think Chris Clegg does really good prospect work, so I trust his evals quite a bit. So he said if the Brewers can sign him, that would be a really big steal, and sounds like they will be. So that's going to be a fun one to watch. And then the last one I'll talk about is Rylan Mills, catcher out of Missouri High School, committed to Southeast Missouri State. So pretty under the radar guy for a recruit even, but he had a max exit velocity of 110 at a PBR event. Ton of bat speed on blast sensors. He had 84 mile per hour bat speed. He also worked out for the Brewers personally in Milwaukee a week or so before the draft. There was an article written from one of his hometown papers talking about that. The arm is pretty strong. I think he needs work in terms of like the actions behind the plate, but like this is a really interesting bat that I think nobody really knew about and is committed to a pretty small school. I'm guessing they're going to sign him, and I think there's quite a bit of upside here if they do. And my guess is it won't even cost a ton to sign him. I think back to Josh Adamszewski, who was a Ball State commit, and he signed for like $250,000, so only $100,000 against the pool. Some of these smaller school commits don't have NIL money calling their name, know that they probably will go to that school, and if they're going to be a big draft prospect, they'll probably have to transfer at some point to do so. So there's a lot that they have to factor in. I think the Brewers waited as long as they did on Mills because they thought nobody else really knew about him, and he's a pretty interesting pick. So that'll wrap up all of the picks. I'll quickly take some of these questions we had. So I talked about Brady Ebel. We already talked about that one. Rob asked, how do scouts and teams know how signable a high school prospect is? That's a good question, actually. Do they talk to them to get a feel for their level of commitment? Do they just guess based on what schools they're committed to? Am I correct to assume the Brewers have a slightly easier time signing pitchers from the draft because they have proven to know how to develop pitching? So I'll answer the last part first. I do think they have a little bit of an up. They can show these high school guys like, hey, here's what we've done with our pitchers when they've come in, and we've had a lot of success developing a lot of people. So I'm sure there's already at this point kind of an understanding. A lot of people are aware that the Brewers are known for pitching development, but I do think it probably helps them a little bit. In terms of how they figure out how signable they are, it's a lot of conversations with their agent. It's conversations with the kid himself. It is probably a bit of a feel like, hey, this is a smaller school. We could probably sway him away from it. But it's not a guess. There is a lot of work that goes into it. And sometimes that doesn't mean a player couldn't change his mind. He might have gone in the draft and said like, hey, I think 600,000 would get me to sign. And then as he goes deeper into the draft, he's like, maybe it's going to be like, maybe I need like 800,000 now, or I'm just going to go to school and see if I can raise my stock and go higher. So there's a lot that they have to factor in. They have conversations going on constantly to figure these things out. But it will be interesting to see how they divvy these up. Andrew asked, based on the end of the last question, which was talking about Ebel's underslot, and he said, I feel like they need to go underslot if they want to be able to sign some of the players drafted 11 through 20, like Brendan Brock. He says that's the one he really hopes we can get. Like I just talked about, Brock's very interesting. How many of these guys do you think we could sign? My guess is what I've been going off of is probably 3 or 4 of the prep guys. They'll sign Coyle, the lone 4-year college guy. And then I think they probably, at this point, I kind of think they're going to sign Brendan Brock. If they can sign 4 prep guys, Brock and Coyle, I think that would be a fantastic 11 through 20. No matter who the prep guys are, I think you would have to feel really good about that. So probably like 6. I'm guessing about 6 of them. Either way, it is a big part of their draft strategy. So he also asked along those lines, if we don't sign a player in the middle rounds, meaning 4 through 10, can we use that money to help with other players? He says, I remembered we couldn't use any of Lavonis's money last year, wondering if that applies to the other rounds. That is the case for any round 1 through 10. If you don't sign that pick, you lose the slot value money. So you would have that taken out of your pool. So they did lose the money from Lavonis last year. The interesting part of that was they had kind of prepped to offer him like $3 million, and his slot value was more in like the $1.2 million range. So they still had about 1.8 million that they hadn't offered to other players that they could throw at a bunch of the day 3 guys. And that's how they signed a lot of the 11 through 21 round guys last year, like Jaden Dubanowitz. I keep saying it how I used to say it, but it's Dubanowitz. And then Tyler Renz, and some other interesting names like Joseph Broughton, who's been hurt, but we'll see at some point pretty soon. So they use this money. They will lose it if they don't sign those guys, though. So they want to sign them. That's why they try and get underslot guys at those deals to try and save money for the other rounds. And the last one here from Ron, he asks, are the area code teams at all affiliated with the organizations? Seems like the Brewers love picking guys from their area code team. He also says, also throw everything at Brendan Brock. What a prospect. So seems like we have a fan favorite in Brendan Brock, like I talked about. Very, very fun athlete and kind of a crazy athlete for a catcher. But to answer the question, the area code teams, they're sponsored by MLB teams, and they sponsor an area. So it's players from the Brewers sponsor players from Southern California, which is a good place to sponsor players from if you are there's a lot of talent there. And there is connections. Like the Brewers have scouts that are specifically going to view that team a little bit more often than other area code teams. But in the end, every team is watching area code games because it's a collection of the best talent in basically the entire country. So it's very heavily scouted by everybody when they play the real games. But the Brewers' connection to them means they get to know them a little bit more off the field easily. They get to know them in the practice setting a little bit more easily. And that probably does end up meaning something when it comes to these. And Ron is correct. Like they do draft a decent amount of them. Brady Ebel is an example of one this year. So that's kind of how it breaks down. But that is the full draft recap. I talked so much. My voice might be gone for the rest of this episode, but hopefully that was a good review for you guys. And yeah, I told you I would go pretty in depth, and I think we did that, Jack.
I think so. Before we move on, just want to give a shout out to not only you, but everybody who really specializes in the draft and the prospect coverage. I try to dip my toe in that a little bit and keep tabs on as many guys as I can, but every time I do it, I always just end up getting overwhelmed by it. Like there's only so far into it I can get. It's not an easy thing to do. This is a big week for these guys. It's a lot of information that you guys are keeping track of. I know you keep your database throughout the entire year for prospects in the Brewers system, for draft prospects, all this stuff. It's a lot of work that goes into it. And I think it makes for some pretty unique coverage too. There's only so many people who I think can handle all this information and be able to deliver it at this time of the year. So kudos to all of you guys. I don't know how you do it. It's not easy, but it makes for some really, really good content because the player development side of all of this is super important. I think there's more people who are getting interested in it now too, which I think is a good thing. Because for the market that the Brewers play in, this is going to be a big part of it. Already is a big part of why they're so successful every year. We got a question on that a little bit later on in the show, and we'll kind of come back to that. But really good stuff. With that, we can move on to some big league talk within the last 40 minutes or so of the pod here. First, we'll talk about the conclusion to the first half. So it's called the first half, but it's not the first half because we know that numerically with the number of games, that's not how it shakes out. But the Brewers completing their final homestand of the first half. They swept the Nationals in 3 games to sweep the 6-game homestand. Things are going really well for the Brewers right now, almost to like this point where if you're the Brewers, you're probably still happy that the All-Star break came because these guys are going to be worn out no matter what. But from a momentum standpoint, the break isn't really like giving you a chance to reset like it would maybe in some past years where they've kind of limped into the break a little bit. Now it's actually just interrupting some really good baseball that they've been playing over this stretch. But we're not going to go through and recap every game like we normally do since we went so long on the draft coverage. That was the main focus of this week. We'll just kind of pinpoint a couple of highlights here from this last week. We'll start with Andrew Vaughn, who continued his hot hitting from the Dodgers series. So in his first week as a Brewer, hitting .429, 500, 1,000. That's his slash line. That comes out to a 308 WRC plus. And within these 5 games that he's played as a Brewer, he has increased his season OPS by 70 points. Couple of impactful moments for him in this series. He homered in game 1. Then in game 2, he hit a go-ahead double in the 4th inning and then a game-tying double in the 9th as part of that eventual Brewers walk-off win in game 2. Sticking there, a moment that kind of jumped out from late in that game as part of that whole sequence after Vaughn hit the game-tying double, Andruw Monasterio called on to pinch run for Vaughn at second base, and he had a really smart base running play. So Jake Bauers was the pinch hitter, and Bauers hits a slow roller to third base. Third baseman has to charge for it. Monasterio, seeing that the third baseman had to charge, he vacated the base, gets to third base on a ground ball that was hit to the left side, and then that forces Washington to play the infield in. It allows Caleb Durbin to hit a ball that looper is the word for it, but it was actually like on game day, it's scored as a ground ball because it actually hit the dirt. So it was a looping liner that hit the dirt, like the back of the dirt. So it goes down as a ground ball technically. But the reason that it got past Nathaniel Lowe at first base is because Lowe had to play in because that walk-off winning run was at third base, and you got to cut that guy down no matter what. So nice play by Monasterio. I think that, it hasn't been a huge sample, but I think for the most part, he's looked a lot more on all sides of the ball, looked a lot more like the guy he was 2 years ago when you were like, okay, this is a pretty quality bench guy to have. He probably shouldn't be starting a lot, but if you're getting like a 85, 90 WRC plus out of him as a bench guy, he's a solid pinch running option. He'll make some smart plays like this. Not a great defender, but he's holding his own at a couple different spots. Like just a guy here, like he's never going to like make really bad mistakes. He's never going to have, even when he's not getting on base a ton, like he's never going to have these quick non-competitive at bats. He's going to see some pitches, just like these little things like this, it just feels like you're kind of watching him turn back the clock a little bit to 2023 when he kind of emerged and was just having a lot of little moments like this where he's not a great player, but he's a guy who you can like see the role for him on the bench, and he's a perfectly capable utility bench guy for a contending team.
Yeah, I mean, guys who can come off the bench and just make winning plays, which is exactly what he did with that base running. I mean, even I think it might even be underselling it how you described it a little bit. Like he actually had House look him back to second a little bit and then recognize that House was too far up. CJ Abrams had kind of been lazy. He didn't really take like a real sprint towards third base, and that the pitcher hadn't really picked up on any of that and wasn't covering up third either. So he even kind of got looked back to second and then was smart enough not to just like jog back to second and be content. He noticed everything. He stayed out off the base a little bit, and then as soon as that throw was getting released, he took off. And I mean, there wasn't even a throw to third. It was just that's really, really good stuff. And when you do stuff like that off the bench, that's going to get you more opportunities to help the team in spots where, like that's just that play probably won the Brewers that game because, like you mentioned, Durbin's ball is not getting over Nathaniel Lowe's head if he is not in. Um, it just changed the entire all the math in the inning was different at that point. Like it had to be played completely differently. They have to pitch Durbin differently. There's just a lot of things that change because of that. So a really, really good play for him. And like you said, I think he's just done a lot of things well this year. Not crazy impressive, nothing mind blowing, but also nothing that stands out as being overly bad in any area. He's just been very solid at a lot of things. And I agree. The defense to me last year was borderline unplayable for a lot of the season. Like he really struggled at times on defense last year. I don't feel that way when he's in the game this year. Even at shortstop, he feels playable when he's at shortstop. So kudos to him for finding a way to just continue to stay in the big leagues and make things happen and help the team because everybody over the course of the season is going to have a role. And he's shown that he can, in his role, help the team win games. And that's extremely important.
Brandon Woodruff also a highlight in this series as well, punching out 10 guys in his second start off the injured list. This was an interesting one because I think early on he wasn't actually pitching all that well. Like the velo was down, a lot of mistakes right over the plate. Like this was not the Marlins start. So I think you can chalk a little more of this one early on up to the Nationals just don't have a very good lineup. I mean, he was getting away with some pitches that probably should have been getting hit fairly hard. But like that Miami start, I do think as this one went along, he dialed it in a little bit more. Once you started getting into like that third, fourth inning, it seemed like he was around the corners a lot more, kind of like he was in that Marlins start. I think it was really just early in this one where he was making some mistakes and getting away with them. So I think the line is a little bit deceiving in this one. I don't think he was as dominant as the 10 strikeouts would suggest or should have been that dominant based on the caliber of the pitches he was throwing. But still a good story for him in his return to the mound at American Family Field. Kind of a cool moment in this one was the rest of the roster letting him take the field just on his own, like just the pitcher catcher battery, and having him kind of get his moment before all the other guys come out and start taking infield. He said post game he didn't even notice that because he was so locked in. Just give me the ball, let's go, take off from there. But nice moment for him, and really couldn't have imagined things going any better really in these first two starts.
No, absolutely not. I mean, 10 strikeouts and just not even 5 complete innings. And I think it was Kurt Hogue who tweeted out that from the time Woodruff was hurt until his return, the Brewers had one start where a guy struck out 10 and didn't walk anybody. And Woodruff did it in his second start back. And he was kind of the guy who's known for having games like that when he was a Brewer. And we talked about that last week. He's on the attack. And like you said, the stuff wasn't great early on. He was leaving stuff in hittable places, but that's always kind of been the thing with Woodruff is even when that's happening, it doesn't really discourage him from just continuing to be on the attack. And then he settles in usually and ends up looking pretty solid as it goes on. And that's obviously what happened in this one. And I think we talked about it last week. You're going to see some homers. That's going to be part of the profile now, especially with the velo being down. So both the runs he allowed being homers, not a huge shock, and all three he's allowed so far have been on the home run ball. But it was just very cool. I was at this game. This was the Brewer Fanatic tailgate. It was great to meet a bunch of the Milwaukee tailgate guys and a bunch of the Brewer Fanatic people in person, and Jonathan Judge. Just a lot of people got to meet a bunch of people. It was a very fun game to be at, obviously with the walk-off and Woodruff's return. But I want to say kudos to like the Brewers fans. I feel like there's been a really good awareness of things lately from the Brewers fan base. Like I talked about it during the Miz start against the Dodgers, and just generally seems like people are really engaged at games. And I think it should be probably noted that I think the brand of Brewers baseball that they play does probably lend itself to that a little bit more. I think as much as we talk about like the lack of power, fans do at games really enjoy action and stuff happening. And the Brewers are a team that's going to have action. There's going to be balls in play. There's going to be stuff happening. They're going to be trying to run. They're going to go first to third. Like, I'm sure that's playing a role here, but I've really been impressed with the fans. I think it's really cool. They seem to be very aware of everything going on. Woodruff's got a great ovation on the way in, on the way out. People just have a good idea. I like it. It's fun to be at games right now. I no offense to people. I don't mean it personally at anybody, but it just, for a while at regular season games, it felt like the atmosphere was a little dead for Brewer fans. And I think there was an element of like, yeah, we kind of expect to make the playoffs at this point, so we're kind of waiting for that. But it seems like this team in particular has kind of brought out some of the excitement again, and that's cool to see. It's fun to be at those games. It's more fun to be at those games when everybody's into it and really engaged. And obviously a very big comeback here in the ninth inning, and Woodruff's return to the home ballpark, and just a really fun day to be at the game. And yeah, I still, like you said, you could have never expected him to have 8 and then 10 strikeouts in his first 2 starts. I mean, you could have told me it would take him 6 starts to get to 18 strikeouts, and I would have been like, yeah, that wouldn't shock me. So to do it in his first 2, it's been really fun to watch. And yeah, just again, I think the fan base has been really, really engaged, and it's been fun to be part of.
Final event to talk about for this week is the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, and we knew already that the Brewers are going to have 2 representatives in Freddie Peralta and Trevor McGill. And then the news broke that Jacob Misiorowski was also going to the All-Star Game, and the hot takes came flooding in. Not surprised either that the hot takes came flooding in, because Misiorowski made history as a pitcher with the fewest appearances before being named an All-Star, just 5 starts into his big league career. There were a couple of members of the Phillies clubhouse, the Philadelphia Phillies clubhouse, who didn't take the news super well, I guess you could say, mainly just because they were standing up for their own guys, which I think is completely understandable. There's been kind of some contradictory reporting from a few different sides about how exactly the selection process went down. Bob Nightingale reported that there had been 10 pitchers who MLB reached out to be replacements before they announced Jacob Misiorowski, or before they extended an invitation to Jacob Misiorowski, and he accepted. Reportedly, the league is claiming that it offered a couple of those Phillies pitchers, Zach Wheeler, Ranger Suarez, Christopher Sanchez, all got the offer to go to the All-Star Game, and they all turned it down because either they wanted the time off or because Sanchez was pitching Sunday. Now, those guys, at least on Sanchez's side, his agent disputed that MLB had ever reached out. So there's kind of a whole big thing going on. But I'll say this. I think there's a couple layers to this, but I think the most important one for me, and I've said this a couple times already since, this whole thing went down. I think the All-Star Game is just in such a weird space right now. And I don't think it's fully clear to anybody what exactly the point of this game is. There needs to be a discussion about what what exactly is the purpose of the game, or multiple purposes of the game? It seems like right now MLB is just trying to do like 8 different things with it. But I think we need to have a conversation like, okay, is the point of the All-Star game to honor the players who are statistically having the best seasons so far through the first half? Is the point of the All-Star game to bring in the most popular players that season? Is the point of the All-Star game to bring in the most established players from recent years, like players who, if they're in the game, you know that maybe some fans who don't follow baseball are still going to know who these guys are, so we're going to put them in the game so we can draw more viewership? Is the point of the All-Star game to honor legends at the twilight of their career, like Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera getting the Legends pick in recent years? Rob Manfred has added that to the mix. Clayton Kershaw was a Legends pick this year. He got to throw an inning in the game. Is that part of the point here? Is the point to showcase young up and coming talent that doesn't have a whole lot of a track record or a whole lot of experience, but from a talent standpoint, they are among what the best the league has to offer, that they are among the best the league has to offer? I think Misiorowski absolutely fits that description. But I think this is where the problem is coming from, because I think the league is trying to do all of these at the same time.
Yeah.
But then it seems like there's a lot of players and even fans too who are still like, no, the point of the game is the first one, to honor the players and reward the players who are statistically having the best seasons this year, who have accomplished the most this year. And if you were to ask for my personal opinion, I think that's where I would lean to, because I've always enjoyed seeing the different players in the All-Star game each year, or seeing the guys who, like, oh, I didn't know this guy was having such a great year.
Yeah.
It's cool to see him here. Like, that's the part of it that I really like, but I'm also not like kind of a more like surface level follower of baseball like this. I do it for a job. So it's my enjoyment of the game might not be the same as how other people enjoy the game. I'm sure there's plenty more people who are just like, no, like, let's do it a different way and show me more of the exciting guys, or this, that, and the other, whatever. And I respect that. That's my two cents on what I think the game should be about. And if you're going off of that criteria, then Jacob Misiorowski should not have been an all-star. Like, let's be objective about this. And the funny thing for me is, this is probably not going to be well received by some people, but seeing how many Brewers fans were like almost defensive over questions about whether or not he should have been pitching in the game, talking about how, no, like, he's one of the most talented guys. You're trying to showcase talent. The All-Star game's a showcase. It's great that the Brewers are getting recognition, this, that, and the other. But I mean, come on, like, this fan base has a little bit of like a little brother syndrome because of the market this team plays in. I've seen it for many years. If this would have happened on the flip side, if there was a pitch, if the Brewers were the Phillies and the Phillies were the Brewers, like in terms of who made it and who didn't, if the Brewers had a Christopher Sanchez type pitcher who didn't make the All-Star team, and then, the Phillies had a Jacob Misiorowski type pitcher who did make the All-Star team over the Brewers version of Christopher Sanchez, you would have absolutely had this fan base out in the streets carrying their pitchforks, talking about how, like, this isn't the point of the game. Like, this is a snub. This is horrible. Like, come on. Okay. Can we like acknowledge that? Like, that's the one part of it that's a little funny to me, to see that all of a sudden, like, so much of the fan base is like suddenly A-okay with this, like, no issues here. Why are we even complaining about it? It's a non-issue. Like, no, there's a little bit of, which is fine. Like, if that's part of what being a fan is about. I'm not saying that you can't do that. Just from my perspective, it was a little bit funny to see, but that's what I keep coming back to. I don't have an issue with him being in the game. Again, I think my preference for how the game should be laid out is that the point is to honor the players who are having the best season this year. And by that measure, I would not have put him in the All-Star game. But I don't think it's a bad thing that you have the pitcher who leads MLB in stuff plus since he debuted, pitching in front of a national audience against the best hitters in the world. Like, that's not a bad, I don't think, no matter how you spin it, like, I have a hard time seeing that in and of itself as a bad thing. I do think it's a bad thing that someone like Christopher Sanchez didn't make the cut. I think it's a bad thing that we have so many pitchers now who are opting out of it. That's the other layer of this too. Like, this doesn't happen if more guys just accept their invitation to begin with. I think that, you're seeing more pitchers who, like, if they've been in before, they don't want to do it again. Like, it's kind of a one-time thing. And then at that point, like, you'd rather just take the time off, or whatever, like, use it as a real break. So there's a couple different layers to this, but that's just kind of how I feel about it. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, my initial reaction was kind of like, wow, that's very cool for Miz, but like, man, that feels like it's kind of taking away from some of what the All-Star game appearances mean. And we've talked in the past, like, All-Star game appearances aren't something we're going to judge somebody's career on super highly, but it is something that I think players take very seriously. I think they take the idea that they were an All-Star to mean something, and I think it does. And I agree with what you said. I fall closer to that line of, like, that's what I want the All-Star game to be. I want it to be the guys who earned the right to be there that year. It's supposed to be, in my opinion, the guys who had the best first half and earned the right to wear that All-Star jersey. Although I'm very glad they went back to the every team wearing their own jerseys thing this year. That was a nice change and fix for them this year. But either way, I agree with what you're saying. I think maybe the thing that made the least sense to me is that for a lot of pitchers, a lot of these guys, and something, this is probably going to have to change with how agents do things, but like, there are a lot of contracts that are negotiated with bonuses for making the All-Star game. So I don't think Christopher Sanchez's extension had that, but I do think if it did, like, that would be a big deal. And at that point, do you say, okay, Christopher Sanchez was our first option. He made the All-Star game. He can come to any of the events he wants, but he's not going to pitch. Do you still just give him the honor of being in the All-Star game because he's not going to pitch, but you were going to put him in the game? To me, maybe that's the best way they could have handled this, is to say, like, hey, Sanchez, you made the All-Star game. We know you can't pitch, but it's not really fair to you that you pitched on Sunday, so we're not naming you an All-Star now. Like, maybe they just do it by name. And again, he can go to the festivities if he wants and do whatever. I think that would have taken a lot of the heat off of what happened here too. I think they would have done that. They would have been like, oh yeah, they named him an All-Star. He can't pitch, but now we go to the next option. And eventually we made our way to Miz, who can pitch and is also going to bring this entertainment factor that I think does matter in a game like this. And the thing that I hated the most about all of this was the way that it was, honestly, the way it was covered by the national media did bother me quite a bit. And a lot of people who do a lot of good work, like the Ken Rosenthal interview during the inning, after his inning, like, that was, come on, like, Ken Rosenthal does a lot of really good work and he's very sourced up and he gets a ton of good breaking news and all these things. But like, you spent the entire interview after he came out basically asking, like, were these guys nice to you even though nobody thought you should be here? Like, that was basically where he was taking every question. It's like, dude, he's in the game now. Like, let's just ask him how it went. He just faced a bunch of good hitters. He's doing it. Like, it just felt like everything kept coming back to that. And that takes away from the All-Star game, and it takes away from Miz's experience, and takes away from the entire experience of All-Star weekend or week or whatever they're calling it now. Like, and it's kind of a shame because it actually was a very good All-Star game. And it was a very fun way to end the game, obviously, with the swing off. I thought that was a cool thing to watch. And it seemed like the teams were very into it. And like, it was one of the more fun All-Star games I've watched in quite a while. But just the attention around it the whole time was just, it made things a little awkward. And yeah, I don't know. I fall where you fall, where, like, do I think he actually deserved an All-Star? No. But eventually you do make your way down the list and it's like, okay, none of these guys are truly All-Stars. Now, do we just go to the guy that is going to bring the most excitement when he does come into the game? And I think at some point you do hit that point. Like, okay, we're not going to name the Pirates' third starter an All-Star this year because he doesn't have All-Star numbers and he's not going to bring as much excitement as Jacob Misiorowski. So at some point, I think you get to that limit. But I think just circling it back, like I think the best way to do it is to have said Christopher Sanchez was going to be our pick. He's an all-star, but he can't pitch. So then we moved on, and now it's Jacob Misiorowski at some point. Like, I think that would have seriously taken so much of the heat off of Miz and MLB if they went that route. And yeah, you're probably diluting the number of all-stars at some point if you keep doing that. I get it. But for pitchers, and especially guys who pitch that weekend before the game, like, they can't pitch. Starters can't pitch in that game. They will not be available. So it seems a little unfair to them to not get the opportunity to at least have it in name if they were going to actually select them, which it sounds like, based on what MLB has said, they were going to, but the guys said no, or they couldn't. So that's maybe the solution to me, is like, do it in name, let them come to the festivities, sit in the dugout if they want to, be on the field for the home run derby, all of that stuff. But it's, they're not going to pitch, and then you eventually find the guys who will pitch. And yeah, I think that's maybe how I would handle it moving forward if they're going to go this route, or if they have to, because I do agree with you. I think guys are opting out. We even saw position players like Julio Rodriguez opted out of the All-Star game this year, which that really has never happened. So I think we're already kind of diluting the sample of All-Stars at some point. Why not just give the guys the opportunity to at least have it in writing? And again, for some guys, it does affect their salary in terms of bonuses. And I think that's going to have to change. People are going to have to stop putting that in negotiations because of the way they're doing things. Or I guess if they go the route of what you said and they actually truly define what it means to be an all-star, then maybe they can keep doing it. But I think at this point, it's too widespread to have that as a legitimate incentive for guys as part of their contracts.
I think Sanchez did have a bonus in his contract for an all-star selection, but I believe the Phillies just paid it anyway.
Oh, yes. You know what? I did see that. You're right.
But the last thing I want to say is, like, it's a really unfortunate situation for Misiorowski, because it is an honor. And look, from a talent standpoint, like, that's why I don't even feel comfortable saying he didn't deserve to be there. Like, even to me, that's one step too far, just because, like, from a standpoint of what he's capable of and how he's handled these first few weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the better distinction is, like, okay, you can have a conversation about all-star, but I think no matter how you slice it, he's deserving of national attention.
Yes.
With what he's capable
absolutely.
of and what he's done so far. Maybe that's the better way to define it. But then to have an honor like this just shrouded in controversy, and I agree with you, like, people in what is probably now one of the biggest days of his life so far as a 23-year-old, coming off the mound and immediately going straight to asking questions about, like, have people been nice to you given the controversy? Like, I can understand, like, some frustration with that, but he's handled all of this super well. Not an easy situation for the kid to be put into. And he did get on the bump and he threw a scoreless inning. So good for him. Good to see that and at least see the representation from Milwaukee. But I guess where I'll leave it is, I don't think there's anything inherently bad about having one of the most talented pitchers in the game, regardless of sample size, getting to pitch against really good hitters on national TV and in that setting, and to get that recognition. I think at the same time, though, like, there are very, very valid arguments against his being on the roster after 5 starts. Like, I don't think people, Brewer fans or otherwise, can just be like, kind of shoving those away and just brushing those away. I don't think that's very fair either. But he pitched a scoreless inning. Trevor McGill also got into the game, recorded an out and put out a fire in the 7th inning. So Brewers pitchers actually going back to back there in the 7th and in the 8th. But I agree with you. I think this was one of the better all-star games that I've seen, especially recently. I like the Derby swing off. I think it sucked that so many of the hitters who probably would have been in it had already left at that point. Yeah. But when Kyle Schwarber came up, like, I think you had a pretty good idea that at the very least, I knew he was getting 2 off out of the 3 swings. But 3 for 3, that was, and I don't think people, like, always realize how difficult that is to do. You get 3 swings and that's it.
Yeah. I still can't believe that they didn't come up with this when it happened in Milwaukee, and they were just like, nope, we don't have any other option. We're just going to call it a tie. Like, why couldn't you come up with that on the spot? That seemed like something that would not have been a very difficult way to, and people would have loved it, especially that was the steroid era. Like people were hitting nukes in Miller Park at the time during the Derby itself. So that would have been a fun way to end it. And maybe we do have one of my favorite memes, which is just Bud Selig looking at talking to the umpires, looking completely confused, like he's got nothing else he can come up with here, and like, well, I guess we have to call. But no, that was a really fun way to end it, and it was a competitive game. And I do think one thing I will say, Jack, I know you don't really pay attention to the other major sports much, but like baseball will always have a better all-star game than most because there's no way to fake it in baseball. Like guys are going to throw as hard as they can. Hitters are going to try and hit the ball. Like it's not like the NBA where you don't play defense. You're going to play defense when you have the ball hit to you in the MLB All-Star game. Like it's a fun game for the most part. It's not something that I tune in for super invested every year, but I wanted to watch for McGill and Misiorowski this year, and then I ended up just enjoying the game. But even like the way the AL tied it in the ninth, like it was an infield hit. Steven Kwan's busting it to first. Like those types of things you just don't see in the other All-Star games. So, and it was I believe it was the most viewed All-Star game amongst all the major sports this year. So they're doing some things right. I think they can improve upon it, but I do think it's a better product than almost any other All-Star game still. And I think they could probably even, if players aren't as willing to opt out, I think it could be an even better product.
I think that's the benefit of it not being a contact sport. You know,
Yes.
like it's not football or basketball where you're always like man to man with somebody. And if you are giving 100%, like there's always that risk of just a contact injury.
Yeah.
You don't have that in baseball, so it's a lot easier for the guys who are on the field. You know, maybe you'll have a ground ball here and there where like guys aren't going to, go crazy like they would necessarily in a meaningful regular season spot. But by and large, because it's not a contact sport, like you have the room to continue showing that amount of effort without risking an injury like you would be in other sports. But yeah, I enjoyed watching it, and I'm saying that as someone who has like seen some All-Star games in the recent past where I think they were more okay than anything amazing. But no, I enjoyed watching it. So we'll close out by scooting through a couple of listener questions really quick. We'll start with let's do a couple questions on Miz, since that's who we just talked about. Mark asked, will the Miz get sent down for a minute to work out of the Nashville pen to manage his innings? No, I think he's up here to stay. I mean, the word was that the Brewers are waiting for a time where they could call him up here where they wouldn't have to send him back down. Yeah. We've talked about it a little before. I think the path to managing the innings is just going to be you do what they're doing coming out of the All-Star break here, where they're reshuffling the rotation so that he's not going to pitch in this Dodgers series. In fact, he's probably going to be now like their number 5 starter with how they line it up, so they can give him the most rest with these extra days. I think you can use some off days in here, a couple of turns through, or maybe you skip a start or bump it back a day. You might see some starts where he's only allowed to go out and throw 50 pitches or something, or 60 pitches, depending on the state of the bullpen. Like doing things like that, I think that's how you just prevent the ticker from going up, because he's on an innings limit. The Brewers won't give a number, and I'm guessing they don't really have like a set in stone number, because it's a lot of it's based on like how many of those innings were high stress innings, how many of those innings were quick low stress innings. Like there's not going to be a hard and fast number, but he's on a limit, and the way you make sure that you don't run into that problem down the stretch when you need him is you pace him out right now. And I think the Brewers are in a position to do that. They got a couple ways that they can kind of navigate that.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that you want to keep him built up as a starter too. And if you put him in the pen, then you kind of have to reset that whole build-up phase. If you wanted to bring him back at the end of the season, you can't just shorten the outings and then just immediately pop back into starter type outings. So I think by doing what Jack just kind of described, they'd be able to kind of keep him built up while also managing the innings at a pretty reasonable rate.
She said, Kami's got a question about Misiorowski. He said, I've seen people write about Misiorowski's slider being closer to a cutter than anything. How does the pitch grade as a cutter? Is it still a plus pitch? So I'm glad that this question was asked, because I'm an insufferable nerd, and this is the kind of stuff that I obsess over. So since he debuted, like I've been saying pretty consistently, it's a cutter. I think I've been on the show before saying that it's a cutter.
Yeah.
And because this is like the kind of thing that I just can't let go of, like I need this. I am like abnormally obsessed with pitch classification and like getting it all technically right, like down to every trait of the pitch. So because I'm like that, I did ask Chris Hook about it on the last homestand. I just asked him like what, he calls it a slider. Obviously he grips it like a slider, but how do you guys actually think of it when you're putting a game plan together, doing this kind of stuff, like determining how you're going to use it? And more than anything, he said like, well, number one, that just doesn't matter a whole lot because we know how it works. We don't need to change the name of it depending on who's talking about it or whatever. Like we know what the pitch does. It does what we want it to. It's a really important part of his arsenal. He lands it for strikes. Like there's very valuable ways to use it. But me being me, I wouldn't let it go. So he said, like, if I had to call it something, I would call it a cutter. So, people on the Brewers coaching staff, if they had to put a label on it, there are some who are going to say cutter more than slider, which I would agree with because everything about it it's really not the velo. It's the direction it's spinning and the way it's moving that makes it a cutter. And that's the velo can play a little bit of a part in that, but by and large, it's not really a velo thing. Like it's back spinning more than it's bullet spinning like a slider. So it's a cutter. But as far as the grade, so really the only thing that I could note with this is as a slider, it's the hardest slider in baseball. As a cutter, it's the sixth hardest cutter in baseball, but he's still basically at the top tier of the list either way. Unfortunately, there's really no way that we can go in and like regrade it publicly on our end just from like the stuff models you see by changing the pitch classification. But the closest thing that I could do was I tried like a savant search to look for cutters that are thrown like at that velo from that slot with that shape. And what I was going to do is if I could find one, then kind of see how the stuff models consider that one. And then kind of gives us an estimate of where Miz is at if you consider his pitch a cutter. But nobody throws a cutter like this. Like nobody throws it from his slot with that movement, with that velo. Most of the guys who throw like harder cutters are much more over the top than he is. The closest I could find was like Garrett Crochet's cutter, but that's coming from a lefty, and it's like 3 miles an hour slower than Miz's cutter, even though like the movement is pretty similar. And even that cutter has like a 114 stuff plus. Miz's slider has a 118 stuff plus. I mean, you just look at, I don't think it really makes a whole lot of a difference either way what you call it. And again, that's probably what Chris Hook is getting at. Like, we can squabble about what it's called, but at the end of the day, it's a really good pitch. Let's not overthink it. Jack, what the hell are you doing? Why does this matter so much to you? But yes, if people want to be like technically nerdy correct, it's a cutter. He considers it like a slider, that doing all the slider things from the grip to the way he thinks he's throwing it in his head, the cues he's using, basically everything he does about it while thinking of it as a slider makes it move like a really, really, really good cutter.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main point there is that it's still a outlier unicorn type pitch that nobody else throws. And so, yes, even if we can't fully put it into a stuff model of any kind, it's still a plus pitch. It's still a very, very good pitch. And like Jack said, and like Chris Hook said to Jack, it doesn't really matter in the end. It plays very well, and whatever we want to call it, I personally am inclined to go with the Slutter call because I think that's a great, I think that's such a great pitch call or pitch name. So I'm down to start calling it that if people will follow me, but I'm also not going to start tweeting that until that's a real thing. But like it's just a very good pitch, and in the end, that's really all that matters. So either way, whether you call it a slider or a cutter, it's a pitch that is going to get very, very good results.
Rob asked us, I know it may be beating a dead horse at this point on the pod, but with Murph's bullpen management, does it ever get to the point where the front office steps in and tells him to stop warming so many guys up? We traded for Nick Mears partly because he had multiple years of control left, and it feels like we are teetering on the edge of burning out his arm in his first full year in Milwaukee. So this is actually a really well-timed question because I know I think it was last week where we talked about like all the guys who've been warming up, or maybe it was the week before.
I think it was 2 ago, but yes.
It might have been 2 weeks ago. But that really didn't happen nearly as much in this Nationals series. In fact, I was actually like really impressed with the way the bullpen was run in that series in particular. And I'm saying that even though like it didn't work perfectly in game 2, especially with like stretching Abner for a little bit, things didn't go super great for him. But like we've talked about this before, like there are going to be times where the process is more sound, but the results might not work out on that day, just in the same way where like, the process might not be something that we like a whole lot, but the results do work that day. And I think that's kind of what happened there. But in that national series, like it just everything felt very clean. Like a guy would start warming up. You knew exactly what situation he was warming up for. He came in for that situation, and it just kind of kept going that way. Like in that game too, Jared Koenig gets up because you have those lefties coming up a third time. You pull Woodruff as soon as the order turns over. The lefties are up. Koenig was ready right on time, comes into the game, pitches to the lefties. They don't do the thing where he's up for like a situation that maybe happens and then he's back down and then gets back up. Like very clean. Guys are getting up at the right time. Guys are coming into the situations that made sense for them. Like part of that is going to be a little bit luck based. Like sometimes you're planning for a situation and something weird happens and it never comes up. But by and large, like through those 3 games, guys getting up for situations that made sense, pitching in those situations. Like that's really all I care about. Like that makes sense, that the workload is pretty balanced. And I do think like knowing you had the break coming up, I think it was okay to like go a couple extra outs from Uribe, especially because you knew he wasn't going to be pitching in the All-Star game. Like, I think you had a little wiggle room there. So I think that basically what you're asking to see, not from the front office stepping in standpoint, but like stop warming so many guys up, like clean it up a little bit. Like it seemed like we saw that in that national series. And there's a couple things that could have been going on that kind of led to it. But the bottom line is like the way Murphy and the guys on the bench handled the way they used relievers in that series was like way more in line with kind of what I feel like we've been waiting to see, and kind of like what feels like has been missing since Craig Counsell left.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. I mean, I don't have much to add on that. I find it funny that we are definitely at the point of where I think a lot of people think we're beating a dead horse on this. But like I think for the most part when we do it, I think there's always a point to it, and we weren't going to discuss it this week because he did a very good job in that national series. And I agree with you. Like, I think the general idea of letting Uribe get a couple extra outs was totally fine. Now, I will say, watching Uribe in that start and seeing some of his sliders at like 83 and 84 at times, and then some fastballs at like 96, I was like, ooh, that's probably not great. And I kind of had a bad feeling it was not going to go super well. But at the same time, that wasn't exactly something Murph could have planned for. He was trying to get Anderson ready, it looked like, in time, and I don't think he was quite ready. And then he ended up, Uribe ends up giving up the 2-run homer, and that's just kind of how it shakes out in that moment. I think he recognized that Uribe didn't necessarily have it at that point and maybe would need to come out, but just couldn't quite get someone ready, and sometimes that happens. But otherwise, like you said, I think everything he did, even to the point of like letting Anderson kind of finish that 9th inning while he was struggling and not going to another reliever just to do it, like that type of stuff. Like I think that was a good process as well. So yeah, I thought he did a very good job in this series.
Bottom line though, I think the preference would be to see more of that now. I think
Yes.
This is where the telling stretch comes up here. Is this like some kind of change that's going to stick, or was it just for one reason or another, or a combination of reasons, like things lined up really well in just that one series? Brian asked, I just wanted to get your take on why the Brewers continue to exceed expectations year after year. When are we just going to expect them to be good? About a month ago, you both seemed to think the Brewers are headed to a 500 win percentage. They're 35-15 in their last 50 games. Do you still believe they play around a 500 clip the rest of the way, or have your expectations changed? So, yeah, pretty much since like the exact moment we said that we were starting to have
Yep.
concerns about like how much further the Brewers could get kind of off of that 500-ish launching pad. Uh, they did exactly that, and they've been like one of the best teams in baseball all around on all sides of the ball lately. Um, I think the biggest concern for both of us wasn't so much where the record was at, but like why the record was where it was at.
Yeah.
The fact that it looked like a largely non-competitive brand of baseball. If they were a lot of games where like like they were losing them, but they were close games and they were doing all the right little things. I think it would have been different, but th- this was a sloppy ball club for quite a few weeks, and to their credit, they've turned that around. I will say, if you had to ask me, like, are they going to play closer to this rate or more around 500 the rest of the way? I'm still taking 500 just because this is kind of the way baseball seasons work. They had their hot stretch, and I mean, that's kind of what the old adage is too. Like if you play 500 for most of the year and then have like 40 or so games where you just go on a tear, or like one good month is kind of like a way it's described as well. A lot of times that's going to get you into the dance. Like just play 500 most of the year and then have a stretch where you're just on fire, like have your hot stretch and then kind of limit the lows. And I think they're in a position to do that now. So I would say closer to 500. Still not quite sure that this is going to be as good of an offense as they've been lately. I think that, like with what Durbin's been doing lately and what Collins has been doing lately, I think those are going to be the big two where I still could see some drop off, some pretty serious drop off coming within the next couple months here. But I mean, we know they're still really good at pitching. They're still really good at defense. They've cleaned the defense up. They've cleaned the base running up. And based on that, like, I don't think we're going to see them hit like serious ruts the rest of the year. They're going to have stretches where things just aren't going their way. And I'm sure there's going to be some ups and downs, but I don't think we're going to run into stretches where it's like, oh man, like I don't think this team is really going anywhere again.
Yep. Agreed. I mean, I think the other part of it with the offense is that there is the possibility to add to the offense over these next couple weeks as well, and that could change some of the math on that too, and just might even make us feel better about their possibilities to actually keep up somewhat of the offensive contributions and production that they've had. But yeah, I mean, they just cleaned up a lot of stuff, and we haven't had to hear about multiple team meetings on road trips and things like that during the stretch. And obviously, a lot of times winning cures all, but at the same time, I think some of it was just there were a lot of signs at that point in the season that were not trending the correct way. And to their credit and to Pat Murphy's credit and everybody involved, like they turned it around, and they turned it around quickly, and things started going the right way in every facet in just a very swift. I mean, it was very quick. And all of a sudden, I think even like a couple of weeks after we did that, we kind of revisited it, and you were like, yeah, I think they're a little better. I tend to be the more optimistic between us anyway, but I think I took a little bit more of like yeah, I think I could actually see them being back in line more with like what I saw before the season, which was like 87 or 88 wins or something. And like now I could see them being even beyond that. I think they have a path to being like a 90 win team again. And that's impressive. I mean, it's been really good work. And like you said, I could easily see them being kind of closer to that 500 clip the rest of the way. But when you go 20 over at some point, that allows you to be that way a little bit and trend closer to 500 at other stretches. And yeah, like you said, I've heard the same saying or something along the lines of what you're talking about, where it's just like you need one really hot stretch, and then you can basically just be solid the rest of the season, and it ends up coming out to a very, very good record at the end of the year. So hopefully they keep it up. I don't think it'll be quite at this type of pace, but I think they are a much better team, and they look like a much better baseball team than when we first talked about that subject.
To answer the first question, I guess, is part of that whole thing about why do they
Oh,
continue
yes.
to exceed expectations. I think there's two. I think it's twofold. I think number one, they have a lot of depth. Like they do a good job of kind of everything we talked about. And this is the question I was getting at when I said we'd circle back to like the importance of development, not only on like the prospect side, especially with the pitching, but also with like some post type guys, especially with the pitching. I think that's a very big part of it. I think just in general, being good at pitching and defense gives you a very high floor as a team. I think it gives you a higher floor than really good at offense does, because if you just have the ability to limit damage, it means you're always going to be in games. And I think there's very much something to be said for just we're in the game. I think it keeps guys more mentally engaged. I think that I think it makes it easier too, just for like you talk about like the number of comebacks that the Brewers had last year. And we've seen it a little bit more recently too. Just being in the game, I think that matters a little bit. So versus like, hitting, yes, you can get out in front of guys, but then if you're always kind of in a perpetual state of like you don't know if this is going to hold up because the pitching and the defense are so bad, like I think if you're picking one or the other, I think you'd rather have it the other way around.
Yes.
Like knowing that you have a very solid floor because you know that at the very least you're just not going to give up a lot of runs. I think it makes for, they're both kinds. When you have a weakness and you're not a balanced team, it makes for some frustration and some stress for fans when you're watching. But I think it's better to have good pitching and defense and sometimes be sketchy on offense and vice versa. I think that's part of it. But just the depth that they have, the ability to kind of like we talked about before, like the reason so many guys like Isaac Collins keep surfacing every year is because they keep scooping up so many Isaac Collinses, and then when one of them hits, things look great. And they kind of do the same thing on the reliever side too, like just scoop up as many of those guys as you can, and then the ones that click, you're always going to have enough that click. And I think just their ability to like develop pitchers on the fly too, like what they did with Myers last year, what they've done with Priester this year, like those are very big parts of it. But I think the other side of it is that they're just not tied down to guys. And this is actually where the Brewers run into criticism because they don't make commitments, like financial commitments. But I actually think that's like a big part of the reason why they never stink. Like even why when things aren't going great, it's more along the lines of like what we saw early this year, where it's like, oh man, things are not trending in the right direction, but they're not buried yet. I mean, we were still saying even at the time, like they very well could turn it around. It's not, if you had to ask us, will they? We probably would have leaned a little more toward they're probably just going to stay kind of in this mediocre space than have a full blown turnaround, but we didn't rule it out. And I think the reason you can do that is because you have the ability to shake things up from the guys who aren't playing well. Oliver Dunn couldn't do anything through his first 17 games. You're out.
Yep.
You know what? We're going to option you. It's not like you're the Reds, and it's like, Jamer Candelario, who we're going to stick with for a year, and he's not good. And then he comes back in year 2, and then it's like, okay, now we need to cut bait, but then we're still like tied down to the money. Like all of this stuff, they don't tie themselves to these guys or to these contracts or these players who could end up blowing up in their faces, so that when they do have guys who don't play up to expectations, they can very easily move on from them and just replace them with somebody else. And I think there's something to be said for that too. So like I said, like Oliver Dunn, not doing great. Gary Sanchez, hurt. Okay. We got Eric Haas. We can call up Eric Haas. Or, now like he can just move on in free agency and we're okay. Or Pedro Severino a couple of years ago, like, well, it's not like we're paying you a lot, so you can come off the suspension list, off the restricted list. You're not playing well. Okay, we'll just DFA you because we got another guy. We got Caratini now. Like the ability to rotate guys in and out, or like in the past, Justin Smoke not playing great. That was a very cheap 1-year signing. You're out. We're going to claim Dan Vogelbach. Vogelbach's not playing well. Oh, well, cheap signing. We can move on. Rowdy Tellez. Like just being able to rotate guys through like that. And on the pitching side too. Like even Yoel Payamps. Oh, you're not pitching well? We got a lot of guys. You're on a cheap ARB deal. We'll DFA you. Like the ability to do that and not have it hurt you financially, or to just not be tied down to, well, we're paying this guy a lot, so we need to stick by him because we need him to figure it out. And I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think there's one part of it is that just having quality major league depth is not flashy. In fact, most times during the offseason, national media is going to talk about your depth as a means to find a replacement for somebody who's not very good on your team. The Brewers, while they will deal from depth and they have done it before and they will do it again, I think they just continue to try to add depth pieces at those spots that maybe don't look so good. And I think the only spot that we haven't seen it work out really is shortstop. Like right now, we haven't seen somebody who was actually brought in as depth who could take the spot of Joey Ortiz right now. We've talked about that a lot. But like with Oliver Dunn, you had Vinny Capra, who also didn't work out. Then you had Durbin, who you acquired, who was a bit of a lotto ticket as a third baseman, and you didn't know how the defense was going to go, but it was another option. And the third guy was the one who's worked out. And you also had Monasterio. If Durbin hadn't worked out, maybe Monasterio gives you what he gave you, like we talked about a little bit already in this episode, more of what he gave you in 2023. Whereas, like, yeah, he can be your second worst guy in the lineup or on the roster, and that's okay. Like, you can get by with that. And you just have a bunch of guys like that who, when there's an injury, you can, they acquire Andrew Vaughn in this trade with Savali, and Rhys Hoskins gets hurt, and now you've got a guy who can be a major league hitter in your lineup who gets called up from AAA, and no one's expecting what he's given to this point, and you please don't expect it going forward to be anywhere near this level. But like, you had a guy who was capable of performing at the big league level, waiting in the wings, and that type of stuff just doesn't really get the attention. And like I said, when it does, it's more like, hey, they've got a bunch of, third base guys. They should probably try and trade one of them and turn that into something else that they need. And I think the Brewers just view it as like, hey, we have all this depth because we want to continue to give guys opportunities and eventually find the right one. I actually think you can look at like the outfield situation from a couple of years ago, and it's a very good example of this. Like Mitchell, Frelick, Weimer, all of these guys are coming up at the same time. The odds of all of them, or all of them actually working out and being your entire outfield, were so slim. A lot of people at that time thought they should trade one of them. And I think some people would feel like they were correct in saying that because Weimer didn't work out. And like, oh, if we would have traded Weimer when he had value, like that would have been great. But you also might have traded Sal Frelick out of that group. And then he's the one that's gone. And now you have a consistently injured Mitchell and Joey Weimer. And like, I think the Brewers find a lot of value in like, hey, we like all of these guys. We're not, and you can't be, but we're not sure on any of these guys, like which one of them is actually going to be a good big leaguer. Let's give them all opportunities and kind of let the cream rise to the top. And then we keep the ones who work out, and maybe to get a flyer for Joey Weimer and include him as part of the Frankie Montas trade. And boom, that's it. We've got our guy in Frelick, who's been very good this year. And we at least got something out of Weimer in the end. Maybe not as much value as if everything was done perfectly. But I just think they do stuff like that, and it ends up with a roster that competes, that has the best version of what they have in their system at the big league level. And it ends up working out very well. And that goes along with everything you talked about with the pitching. I didn't even talk about the pitching. Like, they develop super well, and you hit on everything, so I won't even go into that. But there's so many things. I just think the willingness to kind of let the depth play out and see who rises to the occasion, I don't think a lot of clubs do that. And I think there's actually quite a bit of value in the way they handle those things.
And I think that's what makes it interesting when you talk about what they're going to do at the deadline, because I see a lot of people saying, well, they've got more depth now than they've ever had before. It's time to cash it in. They can use this. They can move more guys and still be okay. And this is kind of where I take a step back, like exactly the point you made. And where, like, that's my pushback against it a little bit. Like, are you sure? Like, here's how they've always operated. Like, just because they've got even more depth, does that really mean that they're going to actually cash it in for something? Or are they just going to kind of stick with this same approach of, well, look what's happened when we kept everybody. Like, it's prevented us in a lot of ways from ever really being in a bad spot. So, like, yes, we could cash some of those guys in, or we could just do what we've always done and we could just keep them. And then the guys who figure it out, we end up with enough guys who figure it out where we're competitive every year. And, you can have that debate on how do you balance those two and kind of when's the right time to strike and all this stuff. I think we've talked before about like kind of this is what it would take for them to make a big move. Like the depth would have to be so good. And, they're closer to that spot than they've been in quite a while. But I would still not be shocked if they just kind of go with the same approach and just say, no, we like our guys. How about we keep all of our guys? And, if we keep all of our guys, then we'll end up down the line with 26 guys who are good enough to field a team that can win 90 games.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the only way you see them really move on from especially prospects at this point is this. They're very convinced that they are selling high on them and they don't like internally they're low on them. And I think Yoferi Rodriguez was probably an example of that in hindsight with the Priester trade. Like he's really struggled with Boston and he's falling down Boston lists nationally like quite a bit. My guess is the Brewers saw some stuff in spring and they're like, we should try and get off of this before this starts to go poorly for us. But if they like the guys, I don't think they're very willing to move them because I think they're pretty convinced like, hey, one of these three is going to work out and we don't want to be the one that misses out on the one that we, traded because we thought we might be able to add a bit of a help in offensively or something at the deadline. So I think the one spot we should mention at some point, if everybody is healthy with the starting pitching, you literally do not have spots on the roster and you don't have optionable players. So like that's the one spot where I think we've talked about Cortez or Quintana. Like you could see a trade with one of them just because they literally cannot roster them all if everyone's healthy, at least in like a feasible way. So that's the one spot where it might be a little different. And the one situation where it gets a little different is when you can't option people and you literally have too many people on the big league roster. But otherwise, I think everything we talked about is more how they play it.
Final question we'll take this week comes from Jar Radcliffe, who asks, could Jack have stolen a home run derby ball using the net?
Yes.
No. If I can't catch a foul ball that's coming back into the press box, you think I'm going to be able to run to the wall, time my jump with the net, and pull one back?
Okay, we gotta. I mean, are you starting in like the normal left field position, or do you get to be like the home run derby kids who are standing next to the wall when it starts?
Well, you still got to move around a little bit, and you got to get in the position. You got to time it up. Like it's definitely makes it a lot easier. I'm just saying, like the coordination of actually like getting down to the inch to the spot I need to be in, having the right extension with the net. Like I don't think it's happening.
Fair. I had more belief in you, but you make some fair points there.
That's going to do it for us this week. A long show. I was expecting a long show, though, because it was draft recap. Spencer, thank you for all that you do on that front and for taking the reins for the better part of an hour and, I don't know, shooting your voice in the process or whatever. But now you get some time off until next year. Or, however, or like the week you give yourself off until you start looking at, mock drafts for 2026.
Yeah, I give myself till that's more of a winter project for me. I start closer to winter. I give myself some time on the draft stuff.
Okay. Well, next time that we're with you, we're going to have some updates from Seattle. I'll have them from the press box in the clubhouse. Spencer's going to have them from, I don't know, whatever section you end up sitting in. But tune in next Friday and we'll have all that for you. Thank you for listening to the Brewer Fanatic podcast.